Inside an igloo, Zeke Draker scoffed at the situation, calling out the foolishness of thinking he could be trapped so easily. With a sigh, Zeke wondered where the ancient relic could be, frustration creeping into his voice. Sitting there, missing both arms, Zeke muttered to himself about idiots and whether they would listen if they were in his shoes. Meanwhile, two soldiers were not happy, calling Zeke an arrogant bastard and deciding they needed to contact their main squad first. One of the soldiers spoke into a mana crystal, confirming they had the Northern Phantom and waiting for their coordinates to be confirmed. As they approached Zeke, they couldn't believe he was still hanging in there despite his missing arm. They wondered why the Northern Phantom was also after the relic the Emperor wanted, thinking he was just trying to be annoying. Zeke fumed as the soldiers complained about suffering for so many days because of him. They decided to have some fun with him before the main squad arrived to pay him back for their hardships. One of the soldiers drew his sword, telling Zeke to brace himself. They wouldn't stop until he was desperately begging them to kill him, and they started deciding who would go first. A light flickered above the soldiers as one of them stepped forward, declaring he would go first if it was heads. Classic coin toss moment, but the vibes were all wrong. Zeke bit down on his bleeding arm, the pain sharp but not enough to distract him from the mess he was in. With a surge of mana, he reattached his right arm, gritting his teeth. He wasn't about to let this slide. Not again. His eyes glowed an eerie purple as he declared himself the Draker's first failed awakener. Zeke Draker, the black sheep of the family, was about to flip the script. Born into the legendary Dragonslayer household but unable to use aura, he was tossed aside like yesterday's trash. Failed to awaken, failed to meet expectations, and ultimately, failed to stay welcome. But failure wasn't the end for Zeke. It was the fire that fueled him. He did everything he could to survive, to claw his way back up. And now, with his arm healed and his eyes blazing, he was ready to prove it. Zeke dashed forward, his sword gleaming as a voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that strength alone wouldn't bring fulfillment. But as the memory of falling coins flashed before his eyes, he wasn't having it. He caught the coin, his grip firm and determined. Looking at the coin, he scoffed. Heads. What a joke. With a swift motion, he sliced off the head of a soldier, the coin's result fueling his ruthless efficiency. Sweet, it was heads. A purple aura began to emit from Zeke, his resolve hardening. That idea was only spouted by those who were already strong. Turning to face his enemies, he continued, those who were weak would be trampled on by the strong. He lunged at a soldier, his movements swift and precise. With a clean strike, he sliced the soldier in half, declaring that their belongings would be stolen. That was the harsh truth of this world. Zeke glanced down at his leg, the weight of his situation sinking in. He let out a sigh, realizing that escaping this mess wasn't looking too likely. Classic. But then, in a move that had everyone questioning reality, Zeke casually reattached his left arm like it was no big deal. The soldiers around him were thoroughly grossed out, muttering about how irregular and nasty it was. Yet, they figured a headless guy probably wouldn't be pulling off any more tricks. With that thought, the men lunged at him, ready to finish the job. Zeke found himself surrounded, with soldiers attacking from all sides. In a flash, swords were sticking out of Zeke's back, and the soldiers lay motionless around him. He couldn't help but mutter about the absurdity of it all. Zeke coughed up blood, his body clearly not handling the whole swords in the back situation very well. Looking at the blood on his hand, Zeke couldn't help but think that his life was slipping away faster than his will to live. He was dying, and it wasn't looking pretty. As he fell, Zeke reflected on his unfinished revenge but found a small comfort in the fact that he had managed to steal the relic the Emperor was after. At least he was going out with a minor win. The relic glinted, a silent witness to Zeke's final moments. Closing his eyes, Zeke whispered an apology, his voice barely audible. Suddenly, the relic began to glow, casting an eerie light around Zeke's fading form. A bright light emitted from the relic, and a voice echoed, speaking of an ancient power awakened by Zeke's strong will. Behind Zeke, a spirit began to form, the voice continuing that the soul of an elder dragon was engraved upon the will of the one who persists. Zeke's final moments were turning into something straight out of a fantasy novel. Suddenly, a system prompt popped up, asking if Zeke agreed to some urgent measure. It was like a cosmic terms and conditions no one ever reads, but way more dramatic. Zeke agreed, and just like that, the Awakener's agreement was confirmed. An irreversible promise power was being activated. No pressure, right? The countdown started. Zeke's fate was now on a timer, and he couldn't even hit snooze. 5. The first number appeared. Zeke's heart probably skipped a beat or two. The suspense was killing him, literally and figuratively. Zeke's mind was racing faster than the countdown. What was going to happen next? The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. If you had a knife, that is. And then silence. The countdown was over, and Zeke was left in the quiet, wondering what just happened. Zeke found himself transformed into a little boy. He was back to being a kid, but with the memories of his past life. Talk about a glowdown. He waved his hand, trying to make sense of it all. Did he just time travel? Because if so, he needed to figure out the rules and fast. Looking at his reflection, Zeke couldn't believe his eyes. He was a kid again, but the memory of the sword piercing his stomach was still fresh. Trauma doesn't just disappear, even with a time jump. Laying down, Zeke realized this place felt familiar, like he had been here before, because, well, he had. Time travel is a trip, literally and metaphorically. Zeke found himself staring at a grand castle, the cradle, the training institution of the Draker household. Talk about a family business with extra steps. Dragons soared through the skies, a reminder of the Draker legacy. The Drakers, one of the 3 great transcendent households, were famous for their dragon-slaying ancestry. Terrican Draker, the hero who saved the continent by taking down the evil dragon Bahamut 1,000 years ago, was the founder of this lineage. Thanks to their ancestors' legendary feat, all descendants of the Draker bloodline were blessed with aura, easily awakening their high-level powers and becoming knights. Basically, they were all born with a cheat code. Zeke let out a sigh, feeling like the odd one out. All except for him, that is, the black sheep of the family, unable to awaken his aura like the rest. He looked up, confusion written all over his face. Did he mishear something? What was going on? Zeke started walking, trying to make sense of the situation. His mind was racing, trying to figure out what was happening. Suddenly, a notification popped up, confirming the soul of the Awakener. Zeke was taken aback, unsure of what to make of it. Another notification followed, stating that the soul of the Awakener was 100% aligned. Zeke was shocked, to say the least. The final notification confirmed that the soul of the chosen Awakener had received the will of the Elder Dragon and was merged completely. Zeke was utterly stunned, his mind struggling to process the sudden influx of information. A message appeared, stating that he had obtained authority to a part of the system. Zeke was bewildered, unsure of what this meant for him. A greeting popped up, addressing him by name. Zeke Draker, it said, as a status window began to open. He couldn't help but wonder if an artifact had been activated. The window was filled with magic videos and other mystical content, leaving Zeke both amazed and overwhelmed. Zeke's hand passed through the screen effortlessly, as if it were made of mist. He realized he could interact with the magical videos just like that. Not only could he touch them, but he could navigate through the content with a wave of his hand, like swiping through a futuristic tablet. As he explored, his mind started connecting the dots, and a thought crossed his mind. A memory flashed in his mind. His master had once told him about classes and skills, an ancient system from a time when people categorized themselves based on their abilities. Skills were specialized techniques tied to those classes, like healing for a healer. The memory of his master's words was vivid, especially the part where she had called him an idiot for not understanding it sooner. The training that followed his awakening had been brutal, pushing him to the brink of death more times than he could count. But according to the status window, it was official, was already a healer. No takebacks. Zeke decided it was time to put it to the test and see if the status window was telling the truth. His mind wandered back to the moment he became a healer in his past life. It had happened in his 20s, right after the Ether Hall was unlocked. As the purple aura enveloped him, Zeke's thoughts raced with realization. Opening his eyes, he found himself still basking in the glow of his Ether Hall. A smile crept across his face as he confirmed his suspicions. His Ether Hall was indeed already unlocked, just like in his past life. With this revelation, everything started to make sense. Even though his trained body no longer existed, his skills and memories had returned to the past with him. Walking with a newfound confidence, he mused that he was in a much more advantageous position compared to who he was before his regression. Sitting down, he knew that to make use of this opportunity, he needed to find out what he had at his disposal first. Just as he was about to dive deeper into his thoughts, a voice startled him, asking for permission to enter. Zeke sighed, realizing it was useless to pretend he wasn't there. He grumbled about not having enough time to read everything, fumbling with how to turn off his abilities. The door creaked open as the voice announced their arrival. Zeke panicked, trying to stall, but the voice expressed disbelief at his lack of preparation. Decker stood there, looking as unimpressed as ever. Zeke's exclusive servant wasn't having any of his excuses. Zeke's mind raced, wondering what Decker was even doing there. Zeke scrambled to his feet, trying to play it cool. Prepared? For what? He hadn't even had time to process what was happening. At least Decker couldn't see the busted windows. Small mercies, right? Decker's voice cut through the air like a knife, sharp and unamused. He couldn't believe Zeke was playing dumb right now. Like, seriously? Zeke was sweating bullets. Decker had always scared him when he was a kid, and even with the mind of a 32-year-old, his body couldn't shake off that old fear. It was like his nerves were stuck on a loop of childhood trauma. But then, like a switch flipped, everything changed. A skill activated. And just like that, Zeke's nervousness vanished into thin air. Talk about perfect timing. Zeke felt a newfound calm wash over him. This composed mind thing was no joke. He glanced at the status bar, raising an eyebrow. So this was a skill, huh? And it just activated on its own? Convenient much? Decker, meanwhile, was not impressed. He had already told Zeke a million times how important this event was. Zeke looked up, meeting Decker's gaze. Of course he was listening. Maybe. Sort of. Okay, not really, but Decker didn't need to know that. Zeke, still locked in Decker's gaze, suddenly found himself on his knees, looking a bit worse for wear. Tears streamed down his face as he tried to play it cool. But let's be real, he was definitely not cool right now. He stammered about some evaluation test, something called pancration, as if that would make everything better. Back at the castle, the scene shifted to a broader view of the Draker's training system, known as the Cradle. Starting at the tender age of 7, every kid had to go through 5 years of what could only be described as hardcore basic training. The instructors would evaluate the students each year through intense competitions, testing their swordsmanship and combat skills in something called pancration rules, just raw survival. Opponents were usually chosen by the instructors, but sometimes, if both students were up for it, they could choose their own battles. With no rules in place, injuries were pretty much guaranteed, and yeah, not everyone made it out alive. But this brutal competition was what decided the students' class placement within the academy. The stakes were high, and the kids had no choice but to fight with everything they had. The children had no choice but to fight with all they had. The day of pancration had arrived, the final part of the evaluation that would decide their fate within the academy. The instructor made sure everyone was aware of the gravity of the situation, and the students responded with a resounding affirmation, ready to face whatever came their way. The head instructor, Panmark, wanted them in high spirits so they could get started right away. The students prepared themselves, mentally and physically, for the challenges ahead. Among the students, Zeke stood out, not necessarily in a good way. The whispers around him were less than encouraging. After the humiliation he faced the previous year, many wondered why he was even there. Some even said they would have run away if they were in his shoes. But Zeke, hearing every word, stood his ground, ready to face whatever came his way. Zeke stood firm as a voice boomed, calling for Aaron and Gata to step forward. They responded swiftly, their determination clear as they prepared for what was to come. The tension in the air was palpable as the command to get ready echoed around them. Zeke took a deep breath, his focus sharpening. With a single word, the challenge began. The atmosphere was electric, and Zeke knew this was his moment to prove himself. The scene was set, the stage was ready. Zeke watched intently, his mind racing with strategies and possibilities. Every move was crucial, every second counted. Zeke's eyes darted across the arena, taking in every detail. In a flash, it was over. The voice declared the fight finished almost as soon as it began, pointing out the critical mistake of not getting into the proper defense position. Yikes, talk about a quick lesson. Gata was unable to fight, and Aaron was declared the winner. Zeke couldn't help but reflect on how he used to be deathly afraid of such challenges when he was younger. But now, these guys seemed like nothing compared to what he had faced before. Zeke's confidence grew as he realized how far he had come. The challenges that once seemed insurmountable now appeared almost trivial. With a newfound sense of determination, Zeke prepared to face whatever came next, knowing he was ready for it all. Zeke and Leon were called out, asked if they were ready. Zeke responded with a confident yes, while Leon, ever the man of few words, simply nodded in agreement. Zeke couldn't help but think about how his opponent just had to be Leon, of all people. The universe really had a sense of humor. Leon, with his usual calm demeanor, noted Zeke's return, suggesting he hadn't gotten enough of his attention last year. Classic Leon, always keeping it cool. Leon, not one to mince words, told Zeke to beg for his life if he wanted to live, calling him a parasite. Zeke, taken aback, stammered an apology. Zeke pleaded for mercy, adding that Leon had been his opponent every year anyway. It was like a weird tradition at this point. Zeke was sure Leon had pulled some strings behind the scenes. He could already hear Leon's excuse about overcoming dirty tricks to be a true dragon slayer. Yeah, right. Zeke couldn't help but wonder why his cousin had to be such a piece of work. Family reunions must be a blast. In his past life, the 4 siblings of the direct bloodline never had the chance to meet. But there were more than a dozen cousins who made up for it. Those cousins were more than willing to bully him. Family goals, right? Leon had to give it to Zeke. He was persistent. Zeke, on the other hand, was just trying to survive another family gathering. Leon wasn't done yet, taunting Zeke about his previous defeat, questioning if he had the courage to return or if he simply hadn't learned his lesson due to his inferiority. Zeke, however, wasn't having it. He activated his class skill, composed mind, preparing himself for whatever Leon was about to throw at him next. Leon scoffed, clearly annoyed that Zeke wasn't cowering in fear. He had heard enough of Zeke's sassy remarks and was ready to put him in his place. Zeke, though, was unfazed. He calmly warned Leon not to call him inferior again, his voice steady and composed. Leon, ever the charmer, asked what Zeke planned to do about it, still throwing around the inferior insult like it was his favorite toy. Zeke, though, was done playing games. He activated his skill, Critical Strike, and let his fist do the talking. Leon staggered back, clutching his face in pain. He had clearly underestimated Zeke's strength, and his face was paying the price. Zeke, meanwhile, was just as surprised as Leon. He had only meant to knock him out, but his skill had activated with his punch, sending Leon flying. He couldn't believe what he had just done, and neither could the onlookers, who shouted his name in shock. As the dust settled, a voice boomed, accusing Zeke of jumping the gun before the fight was even announced. Zeke just stood there, shrugging, thinking who even says ready, get set, go in a battle like this? The crowd murmured, agreeing that the one to strike first always had the upper hand. Zeke just smirked, brushing off the drama. Leon, still dazed, tasted something metallic in his mouth. Blood? He tried to play it cool, insisting he was fine. The referee, unimpressed, rolled their eyes and told them to get on with the fight already. Leon, still wobbly, tried to psych himself up, muttering about taking down his opponent. His opponent, overhearing him, scoffed and called Leon an inferior piece of something unmentionable. Leon shot back, calling the other guy the stupid one. The referee had clearly had enough and yelled for them to get ready. The crowd leaned in, the tension rising. This was about to get messy. With a final shout, the fight was on. Let the chaos begin. The chaos began with a punch that left everyone stunned. Mouths agape in sheer disbelief. The initial punch had everyone sweating bullets, but it turned out to be all bark and no bite. With a solid guard, the threat seemed minimal, but caution was still key. The left-hand counter was the move to watch out for, telegraphed like a bad soap opera. It was so obvious. It was almost laughable. A brief pause, a moment of silence, the calm before the storm. Suddenly, a furious shout echoed, calling out the opponent in a fit of rage. The tension was palpable, the outcome uncertain. Confusion reigned as everyone struggled to comprehend what had just transpired. The dust settled, leaving a hushed anticipation in its wake. The dust settled, leaving a hushed anticipation in its wake. Then, disbelief shattered the silence. No way, this couldn't be the combat sense of a 12-year-old, could it? When Leon dodged Zeke's counter and went for the takedown, everyone thought it was over. Leon had this in the bag. But Zeke punched Leon's chin and slipped out of his grasp. Leon's mistake? Letting his guard down too soon. Zeke, though, stayed cool as a cucumber, even after his counter failed. The precision and focus needed to land that hit? Next level. Was this really the same Zeke he knew? The question hung in the air like a bad Wi-Fi signal. Leon was internally freaking out. He couldn't pull off moves like that, no matter how hard he tried. He needed space and fast. Distance was his only hope. But before he could even process it, Zeke was already on him again. How was this kid so strong while being so tiny? It made zero sense. Zeke smirked, feeling that familiar rush. You inferior little alright, head managed to control his strength this time. But Leon wasn't having it. How dare he? Zeke activated his class skill, heightened senses kicking in like a cheat code. Silence. The calm before the storm. This feeling was all too familiar. Like when you finally get the last slice of pizza, only to realize it's pineapple toppings. Zeke was ready. Zeke had gotten used to controlling ether, like finally mastering a TikTok dance after weeks of cringe attempts. He stood there, ready to flex his newfound skills, the air around him practically buzzing with anticipation. The moment hung heavy, like that split second before a plot twist drops in your favorite series. Suddenly, the vibe shifted. The enemy was clearly not expecting Zeke to pull out his secret skill. Zeke activated his skill, Precise Stab, like he was about to hit the high score in a boss battle. The tension was real, and everyone could feel it. This was the moment, no cap. Precise Stab was all about hitting those weak points for maximum damage, like finding the one flaw in your crush's seemingly perfect Instagram feed. Zeke was locked in, ready to make his move and turn the tide of this battle. Zeke was locked in, ready to make his move and turn the tide of this battle. Even someone like him should be able to learn their lesson, right? With a determined look, he was ready to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. This was his moment to show them what happens when you mess with the wrong guy. It was time to show them the consequences of their actions. He was ready to make them understand the gravity of their mistakes. After a bit of exertion, his mind felt clearer, like he could finally see things for what they were. He could recognize the people around him now, but he needed to stay focused. It was time to stop looking around and face whatever came next head-on. Zeke Draker finally caught his breath after that intense moment, feeling like he could think clearly again. As he scanned the crowd, recognition dawned on him, but the glares he received were far from welcoming. Maybe it was time to stop looking around and face whatever came next head-on. Zeke decided to take charge and challenged anyone with something to say to step forward. A voice called out Zeke's name, commanding attention. The voice introduced himself as Zeke's Pancration opponent, setting the stage for a confrontation. He had something to say just like Zeke had asked. He revealed himself as Jakin Vardek, another cousin, adding a layer of family drama to the mix. Zeke wasn't impressed and called him out for being boring all by himself. Suddenly, another name was thrown into the ring: Liam Stone. The voice told him to join Jakin, making it a 2-on-1 situation. With a smirk, the voice declared that this made the fight fair. Because, 2 against 1 is totally fair, right? The tension escalated as one figure challenged the other, clearly not amused by the previous remark. The response was swift and sharp, confirming the insult with a casual yet cutting tone. The atmosphere grew darker as a threat was issued, naming Zeke Draker as the target. Before anything could happen, a command was given to Zeke Draker to hold back until the signal was given. Zeke responded with a casual acknowledgement, and the anticipation built as the word, ready, hung in the air. There was a sense of intrigue in the air as someone noted the significance of seeing him again in this place. The mercenary king, Liam, was revealed, his reputation preceding him. Reflections began on Liam's past, recalling his time as a servant in his previous life and his journey through the cradle and the academy. Despite being a distant relative, he was left behind in education but begged to join the higher education of the academy, Valhalla. His path took a turn as he joined the Knight Order of a small nation called Baranon. When Baranon fell, he became a mercenary, and in chaotic times people flocked to the strong. With his long tenure as a mercenary, he became a Red Knight and started his own group, the Stone Mercenaries. He united the 3 largest mercenary groups and was soon called the Mercenary King. As the Empire brought the Stone Mercenaries into the fold, Liam stepped onto the battlefield of the Continental Wars. And guess who was on the opposite side? Yep, yours truly, teaming up with the Northerners, ready to face off against Liam. But hey, maybe this time things could be different. Suddenly, a voice rang out, breaking the tension. Begin. Wait, did he just say what I think he said? Did I say? Oh no, he did. He totally just said, "Together we meet again." Cringe alert. But Liam wasn't having any of it. He shot back, "Do you really think I'll play along with your cheap tricks?" Ouch, the sass was strong with this one. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jug. The voice echoed, pointing out that he should have checked properly before attempting that kick. Oof, harsh but fair. Silence hung in the air, the weight of the words sinking in. The tension was still there, but now it was mixed with a hint of embarrassment. The voice came again, this time pointing out that he was looking away. A stuttered response trailed off, the realization of his mistakes starting to hit. A brief pause, the air thick with anticipation. What would come next? The silence stretched on, the weight of the moment pressing down. It was like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then a taunt. Wasn't he scared? The voice seemed to be enjoying this, ramping up the pressure. The voice continued, pointing out that he couldn't even predict that feint. This was a call to come together, a challenge thrown down. Another pause, the air electric. What was coming next? The voice declared that he alone wasn't enough. Well, that's a confidence booster. The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the challenge ahead. No pressure, right? A sudden loud noise echoed. It was time to face the music. A sudden loud noise echoed. It was time to face the music. And by music, he meant the absolute beatdown he was about to deliver. Someone was clearly not happy with the guy on the receiving end of this rage. This guy, though, he was something else. Part of the OLS 5, level 312, just like them. Or so it seemed. Fighting him was a pain. Literally. His reach was insane, like trying to fight a human Stretch Armstrong. Dodging and weaving, he knew he had to be strategic. Letting him attack first would be a game over. He couldn't just sit back and take hits. That wasn't an option. He needed to take the lead, and fast. It was now or never. He had to make his move, take control, and end this before it even started. The tension was high, the stakes even higher. It was time to see who would come out on top. The battle kicked off with a flashy skill activation. Slash unleashed a barrage of attacks, blinding the enemy and setting the stage for what was sure to be an epic showdown. The crowd watched in awe as the combatants clashed. The tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. The onlookers were losing it. The sheer intensity of the fight had everyone on the edge of their seats, whispering in disbelief at the insane display of power. One fighter, clearly enjoying the spotlight, taunted his opponent, knowing full well that his unique technique was something out of the ordinary. Turns out, the fighter was packing a northern fist technique, a rare sight in these sword-dominated lands. The crowd was losing it, wondering how he pulled that off. But flashy moves aside, the fighter admitted his body wasn't always in top shape. Even just talking about it was enough to leave him winded. Setting that aside, the real issue was his opponent's monstrous physique. The guy wasn't even trying to counterattack or dodge, just tanking everything with his guard up. It was a far cry from his days as the mercenary king, but clearly age had mellowed him out. Regardless, the fighter knew his body was hitting its limit. The battle was intense, but even the most hyped-up fights have to end sometime. Just as the fighter was about to throw in the towel, the plot decided to throw a curveball instead. In a move that defied all expectations, the opponent pulled off something that left everyone questioning their entire existence. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, eyes wide, jaws dropped, collectively wondering if they had just witnessed the impossible. The fighter's evasive maneuver was so slick it was like he had some kind of sixth sense. The crowd was losing it, screaming, and questioning reality. But how could he see something that was invisible to the naked eye? The opponent's move was supposed to be undetectable, yet the fighter dodged it like it was no big deal. The arena was buzzing with theories and wild guesses. Everyone was trying to figure out the fighter's secret, but no one could quite put their finger on it. The tension was palpable, the excitement was through the roof, and the fight was far from over. The crowd was hyped, the fighters were locked in, and the battle was about to reach a whole new level. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The fighters stood ready, the crowd on the edge of their seats, waiting for the next move. In the blink of an eye, the atmosphere shifted. Something big was about to go down, and everyone could feel it. The fighters locked eyes, their breath steady, their minds racing. The calm before the storm was almost over. Suddenly, one of the fighters activated a class skill, heightened senses kicking in. The game was about to change. The crowd could sense the shift, their excitement reaching a fever pitch. This was going to be epic. With a sudden move, one fighter landed a serious blow. The other staggered, struggling to keep their footing. Oxygen was now a luxury they couldn't afford. The crowd gasped, their minds blown by the intensity of the fight. This was next-level stuff. The fighter who landed the blow couldn't believe their own power. This was insane even for them. The other fighter, struggling but not out, managed a grin. They weren't done yet, not by a long shot. The battle was far from over. Both fighters were still standing, their spirits unbroken. This was going to be a fight to remember. The tension was palpable as the two fighters squared off, each determined to prove their strength. The challenge was thrown down. Let's see who comes out on top. The air crackled with anticipation, the fighters circling each other, eyes locked in a battle of wills. Silence. The calm before the storm. Both fighters were coiled like springs, ready to unleash their power at any moment. The crowd leaned in, breath held, waiting for the first move. This was going to be epic. And then, like a bolt of lightning, the first strike was thrown. The fight was on. Blows were exchanged, each one more powerful than the last. These fighters weren't messing around. The fight was intense, each combatant pushing the other to their limits. This was a clash of titans. Sparks flew, the sound of fists meeting flesh echoing through the arena. This was next-level stuff. The fighters were locked in a stalemate, neither willing to give an inch. This was the definition of a power struggle. The tension was high, the fighters panting but not yielding. This was a battle of attrition now. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, hearts pounding in time with the fighters' blows. This was the fight they had all been waiting for. Yeah, this was it. The moment of truth. Both fighters knew what was at stake, and they were giving it their all. No regrets, no holding back. It would be worth it, taking down Zeke Draker. The ultimate prize, the ultimate challenge. This was the fight of a lifetime. Back at the castle, Decker was all like, "Heard you got messed up in Pancration, you good?" But Zeke just brushed it off. Yeah, I'm fine. Decker wasn't buying it though. He was like, "Mind if I check your pulse?" Classic concerned butler move. Zeke knew what was up. Decker was trying to see if he'd awakened his aura. But then he paused. Something wasn't right. Decker finished up and thanked Zeke. But Zeke was left wondering, is this guy a blue knight? Zeke couldn't help but feel something was off. Decker's thoroughness was suspicious. Normally, checking for aura awakening is just a quick glance at the Danteon. But Decker was going above and beyond. Zeke started to think, maybe Decker really is a blue knight. I mean, controlling aura like that? Not easy. But then again, not all knights are created equal. They're ranked by their fighting skills and aura control. If Decker can really control aura that precisely, he's got to be a big deal. But Zeke couldn't be sure yet. Zeke knew he had to find out more. Not all knights are the same, and he needed to know what he was dealing with. Zeke learned that a white swordsman is the novice level, basically the starting point for most children before they undergo the blessing rite. Moving up, a yellow swordsman is what one becomes after awakening their aura and opening their Danteon. All trainees of the cradle reach this level post-blessing rite. Once someone masters controlling their aura, they earn the title of knight. Classic level-up grind, right? Then there's the purple knight, where one can reinforce their sword with aura. Above that is the blue knight who can manifest an aura blade. Fancy stuff. Beyond these levels lies the realm of those who have transcended their limits, a realm that the mercenary King Liam had reached before his regression. Zeke recalled that he himself had reached this realm before his own regression. Memories, am I right? There's also the Black Knight, but those monsters are like 1 in a million. Zeke couldn't help but wonder how someone skilled enough to be a commander ended up as his babysitter. Shrugging it off, Zeke figured there was no way his babysitter could detect his ether. Confidence level high. After all, ether is something only 2 people in the entire world can use. Plot twist alert. A figure loomed over the young master, their voice dripping with suspicion as they questioned whether he might be concealing something. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and unyielding, as the figure pressed further, demanding to know what he was hiding. The young master remained silent, but the figure wasn't backing down, repeating their question with even more intensity. A brief pause settled between them, the tension palpable. Then, almost as suddenly as it had begun, the figure waved it off, claiming it was all just a joke. But the young master wasn't buying it, turning the question back on the figure, asking why he had changed so suddenly. The young master continued, stating that the figure should be asking why he had only changed now. He hinted at more changes to come, suggesting that things were simply falling into their rightful places. With that, he ordered the figure to follow him. The figure, now seemingly resigned, agreed, stating that he understood. He informed the young master that the training room he had requested was already prepared. The young master nodded approvingly, commending the figure's efficiency. As the figure took his leave, bidding the young master to rest, the young master's thoughts turned strategic. If the figure was ordered to keep an eye on him, it would be wise to keep him close to extract information instead. The young master's mind raced, trying to figure out who ordered the figure to keep an eye on him. He doubted it was someone from his mother's side. It had to be one of his siblings. But as he pondered, he couldn't help but notice his surroundings. This was a personal training room, and the household was really living up to its name. The young master couldn't help but be impressed by the household's reputation. Before diving deeper into his thoughts, he wondered if he should check out the system or whatever it was called. He paused for a moment, considering his next move. His slash skill had become proficient, and he wondered if it would improve the more he used it. The skill was naturally activated based on his actions, making him question if he had it before. He wondered if learning something new would add it as a skill too. He took a moment to process all the new information. He pondered the difference between a skill and a class skill, as they seemed to be activated similarly. He noticed a draconian skill, but it was unavailable. 10 points were needed to unlock it. He took a moment to consider his options. Monsters came to mind, and he recalled that there were plenty in the dungeons. However, he needed to be at least a purple knight to gain access. The young master's journey was just beginning, and he had much to learn and explore. On top of that, he was super curious about why he had regressed to the past and what the system thing was all about. But he had almost zero information to go on, which was a major bummer. He shrugged it off, deciding not to dwell on it too much. He figured he would use whatever the system was to his advantage, as long as it could help him become stronger. He was determined to make the most of the system he was using, no matter what it was. He recalled that he was a Draker, a name that seemed to carry weight. He remembered that knights reinforced their aura in the dungeons, a crucial piece of information. He thought about how much he had been taught, grateful for the knowledge he had gained. With his thoughts settled, he felt ready to take on new challenges. But training proved to be more intense than expected. After just 2 hours, he was already on the verge of collapse, questioning if he had pushed himself too hard. He knew he needed to recover quickly. Activating his class skill, Vigor Recovery, he hoped it would be enough to get him back on his feet. As he felt his strength returning, he reflected on how rare healing skills were. He had only learned about them after meeting his master, realizing just how unique his abilities were. But with rarity came unwanted attention. Using such skills in public would only make him stand out as an irregular, something he wanted to avoid. That was why he hadn't used them during his fight against Liam, even though it might have turned the tide in his favor. Instead, he had to wait until he was safely back in his room to heal himself, making sure no one saw him use his rare ability. With his recovery complete, he was ready to dive back into the grind, determined to keep pushing forward no matter what. But as he caught his breath, he realized time had flown by, and it was already dinner time. He couldn't help but wonder what he would say to Decker when they finally crossed paths. A week later, the cafeteria at the Cradle was buzzing with chatter about Zeke and how he had seemingly transformed into a completely different person. Some speculated if he had dabbled in some dark magic to bring about this change, but others quickly dismissed the idea as absurd. The guy was a total loser, after all. How could he possibly have pulled something like that off? Meanwhile, he hoped to find himself among the stronger guys, dreaming of the day he could prove his worth. As he pondered his place among the stronger guys, Reina Turin stepped into the scene, her presence commanding attention. She wasn't having his lack of appetite, insisting he eat up and get the energy needed for the upcoming swordsmanship duel. Owen Zimmons chimed in, echoing the sentiment that he needed to be at his best for the duel ahead. But the guy wasn't having it, asking if they were trying to piss him off, his inferiority complex flaring up. Mahat entered the scene, his presence adding to the tension. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the upcoming duel hanging heavy in the air. Everyone was lost in their thoughts, the anticipation building. The tension was palpable as they all wondered what was going to happen next. Someone finally broke the silence, asking what he was going to do. Zeke Draker's name was called out, the focus shifting to him. He wasn't sure, reflecting on how savage yet impressive Pancration was, but he had his doubts about the guy's swordsmanship. After all, what could he really do if he could barely hold up a sword, let alone wield it effectively? The group couldn't help but agree, mocking how he was so weak that he needed a customized sword because the basic ones were too heavy for him. It just didn't make sense that they lost to someone so inferior. They were sure the others knew this too since they saw the match. He only won against them in Pancration because of sheer luck, or so they thought. Luck? The word hung in the air, making everyone pause for a moment. Silence fell over the group as they considered the implications. If they really believed that, then they had no right to be Knights of the Drake. The statement was bold, and it hit hard. The tension was far from over as the next challenge was announced. A sword duel, but not just any duel. This time, real swords were involved, raising the stakes even higher. Zeke was called up next, and all eyes were on him as he stepped forward, ready to face whatever came his way. But as he appeared, murmurs spread through the crowd. His sword was ridiculously large, almost comically so. Some wondered if he thought a bigger sword made him stronger, but Zeke was unfazed. With a calm confidence, he introduced himself as Zeke Draker, and the crowd hushed, waiting for what would happen next. The tension was thick as the opponent was chosen, and Zeke was selected. The challenge was set, and there was no backing down now. With a nod, Zeke accepted the challenge, and the crowd roared in anticipation. This was going to be intense. The challenge was accepted, and the atmosphere crackled with tension. This was going to be epic. Zeke casually lifted a massive claymore like it was a toothpick, leaving everyone in awe. Like, seriously, how is that even possible? Standing face to face with Zeke, it was clear something was different. This wasn't the same guy who used to struggle with a basic sword. Zeke had seriously leveled up. His aura was intense and he looked like he'd hit the gym hard. What was going on? But hey, no time to overthink it. Getting intimidated before the duel even started? Not cool. He had accepted the challenge with confidence, and now it was time to back it up. No second thoughts allowed. This was what he had always done, but facing the Lightning Knight, that was a whole new level of pressure. The Lightning Knight was no joke. She had made a name for herself during the Continental Wars and was already being called one of the greatest of the next generation. Rumors said she had awakened her aura a few years back, and now she was basically a legend in the making. This duel was going to be intense. But here's the kicker. She hadn't even used her aura in the cradle. Word was she wanted to keep her fundamentals sharp. Like, who even does that? Fundamentals, huh? Well, the match was about to start, and the crowd was hyped. The referee yelled for them to begin. The duel kicked off with both fighters circling each other, sizing up their opponent. The tension was palpable. She made the first move swift and precise. Her opponent barely had time to react. The crowd gasped this was going to be good. Her opponent countered, but she was ready. Every block, every parry was calculated. She was in her element. The fight intensified, each move more impressive than the last. She was holding back, but it was clear she was toying with her opponent. Her opponent was no slouch, but she was on another level. It was like watching a master at work. The crowd was in awe. She was better than anyone had expected. But would she finish him off in one strike? There was a moment of hesitation. The crowd held their breath, waiting for the final blow. She was clearly the superior fighter, but something was holding her back. The crowd was on the edge of their seats. Would she do it? Would she finish him off in one strike? The tension was at its peak. The crowd screamed for her to finish him off in one strike. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The crowd's jeers echoed, calling the fallen warrior an idiot for not seizing his chance. But Reina wasn't just toying with Yui. Her movements were calculated, deliberate. Though her openings were narrow, she could sense them. Yet, every time she tried to exploit a gap, his sword met hers, almost as if he was applauding her efforts. It was frustrating, to say the least. But right after their blades clashed, another opening would appear. It was almost like a dance, a training duel meant to teach her. Reina couldn't help but feel like she was being guided. Her skills honed with each passing moment. This wasn't just a battle. It was a lesson, and she was the student. The lesson was far from over. The Lightning Knight had more to show, and the student was about to witness a whole new level of combat. Her sword skills were impressive, expected from someone obsessed with fundamentals. But that obsession might just be what was holding her back. A mysterious figure watched, considering how to help her break free from the constraints of her own making. This was how the Lightning Knight fought, even from the very beginning. Her skills were something to behold, but there was room for growth. Her swordsmanship was top-notch, a testament to her dedication. Yet, her strict adherence to the basics was limiting her potential. The observer decided to step in, planning to help her break out of her shell and unleash her true capabilities. What came next was an extremely intense moment. The stakes were high, and the tension was palpable. He intended to close the gap in one swift move. Speed was his ally, and he wasn't about to hold back. As he moved, his speed was nothing short of impressive. Before anyone could react, he was already there, ready to strike. The battle was heating up, and everyone was on the edge of their seats. But as long as there was distance between them, reacting to his moves was totally doable. The crowd could practically hear the collective sigh of relief as they realized they still had a fighting chance. The tension in the air was thicker than a Gen Z slang dictionary. Everyone was waiting for the next move, hearts pounding like they were listening to the latest K-pop drop. Silence fell over the battlefield. The kind of silence that makes you want to yell, "Well, don't just stand there." But no one dared to break the tension. The moment stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. It was like waiting for your Wi-Fi to connect when you're at 99% agonizing. The anticipation was building up, the kind of suspense that makes you want to scream into a pillow. Everyone was on the edge of their seats, literally. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence, sharp and clear. It was like the teacher calling your name when you're definitely not paying attention. The crowd collectively held their breath, waiting for what would come next. It was like the calm before the storm, or the quiet before someone drops a major plot twist. The atmosphere was charged with electricity, the kind of energy that makes you want to grab some popcorn and settle in for the show. Everyone was glued to the scene, eyes wide and hearts racing. It was like the ultimate season finale, and no one wanted to miss a single second. The crowd was left in stunned silence, the kind of quiet that makes you check if your ears are still working. Then, the crowd erupted like a pack of overcaffeinated sports commentators. Zeke had lost, and honestly, no one saw that coming. Reina had pulled off something incredible, and the best part? She didn't even use her aura like she usually does. Mind blown. But hold up. The cadets didn't notice the sneaky little detail that was about to flip the script. As Zeke's attack landed, Reina did something unexpected. She used the tiniest bit of aura, like barely enough to even register. It was the kind of move that made you go, "Wait, what just happened?" Reina, the one who swore she'd never use her aura until she made it into the academy, had just broken her own rule. And honestly, no one saw that coming. Zeke managed to force her hand, and now everyone was left wondering what she was even doing. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and everyone was on the edge of their seats. What would happen next? No one knew, but it was clear this battle was far from finished. The tension was palpable as the scene shifted to a sword duel. The atmosphere was charged with accusations of cheap attacks, setting the stage for an intense confrontation. With a nervous affirmation, the challenger readied himself, acknowledging the stakes of the duel. The crowd was in an uproar. A knight abandoning his sword? Unheard of. This was Rains's victory, they chanted. The fallen knight was shamed for his apparent lack of skill and honor, the crowd's jeers echoing around him. Silence fell over the arena, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. The question lingered, did he want to continue? It was clear this battle had taken a toll on more than just his body. Defiance flared in his eyes. He hadn't lost yet. The strike he took was merely a momentary lapse, a brief slip in his guard. If only his opponent had been armed with a dagger, the outcome might have been different. But excuses wouldn't win this duel. The arena fell silent once more, the next move hanging in the balance, the crowd leaning in with bated breath. The tension shattered as a voice echoed through the arena, declaring defeat in a tone heavy with resignation. A pause hung in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Then, the announcer dropped the mic, or at least it felt like they did. Zeke Draker, the guy who was basically called the trash of humanity just a few days ago, had somehow pulled off a win. Against one of the most talented kids from the famed houses, no less. The crowd was losing it. The name Zeke Draker rang out, clear and triumphant, followed by the name of his opponent, Reina Turin. The arena erupted, the crowd's roar shaking the very foundations. The town was in chaos, flames licking the sky as soldiers callously tossed bodies aside. It was a grim sight, setting the stage for whatever was about to unfold. Inside, away from the madness, two figures stood by a window, watching the mayhem unfold. The contrast between the destruction outside and the quiet inside was stark. One of the men looked pale, his face twisted in disbelief as he stared at Abel, who was calmly sipping tea. The sheer absurdity of it all made him question how Abel could be so composed in such a dire situation. A letter lay open between them, the words screaming that someone had actually defeated Reina. The weight of the news hung heavy in the air. Abel, ever the picture of calm, set down his cup and gave William a look. William, always so serious, couldn't hide his frustration. Abel suddenly stood up, his mind clearly shifting gears. He asked how much time they had left until the blessing rite, answering his own question with a hint of urgency. They had 10 minutes, next full moon. Without another word, Abel started walking, declaring it was the right moment to pay the family a visit. William was taken aback, questioning if Abel was really going alone. Abel's hand rested on his sword, his curiosity clearly piqued. There was something about this situation that intrigued him, and he wasn't about to let it go. Gazing out the window, Abel's mind was already racing ahead. He wanted to know what kind of awakening they were about to go through. Zeke's victory left everyone in the cradle completely shook, but instead of celebrating, he just went back to the training facility and kept grinding. About a month later, on the day of the blessing rite, he was still at it. Wiping the sweat off his brow, Zeke couldn't help but wonder how he even managed to become a red knight with his body in his past life. Like, what even was that? Opening his status window, Zeke noticed that, as expected, once his skill mastery surpassed the expert level at 73,137, the skill ranked up and the mastery reset. Classic leveling grind. He even managed to raise his mastery of swift steps, the skill he gained during the duel. Progress was progress, no matter how small. Suddenly, Zeke looked up as Decker approached. Decker had that look, like he wanted something. Zeke was ready to ask what was up. Decker informed him they were leaving in 2 hours. Zeke nodded, ready to get everything prepared. No time to waste. Cut to the carriage already moving. The journey ahead full of unknowns, but Zeke was ready for whatever came next. As the carriage rolled on, Zeke found himself lost in thought. It had been quite some time since he last visited the main estate, the heart of the Draker family's legacy within the Duchy of Troy. Though the family's primary residence was the Four Seasons Fortress in Midland, right at the center of the continent, the blessing rite had to be held at the main estate, where the legend of the Dragon Slayer began. Cue the dramatic music. The sound of footsteps echoed as they approached the grand estate. The main estate of the Draker family, known as the Dragon's Nest Lair, loomed ahead, imposing and majestic. Soldiers snapped to attention as the carriage arrived, their formation crisp and precise. Zeke, now in uniform, couldn't help but notice the sea of faces around him. It suddenly dawned on him that all these onlookers were probably here because of the Continental newsletter. He was sure his family had also sent informants to keep tabs on him. Talk about family drama. Whatever their intentions were, Zeke knew that once they saw him failing his awakening, they would likely lose interest. No one likes a failure, right? With a glare, Zeke steeled himself. He was ready to face whatever came his way, determined to prove everyone wrong. Zeke's glare deepened as his eyes landed on an unexpected figure. His fury was palpable, the kind of vibe that screams, "Did I leave the stove on?" But way worse. A handshake was exchanged, and the air filled with the kind of awkwardness usually reserved for family reunions. Someone mentioned it had been a while, and Abel agreed, his tone as smooth as a butler serving tea. The question of what brought him to the blessing rite hung in the air, followed by a not-so-subtle hint about someone in the class catching his eye. Abel, ever the charmer, played it cool, saying that no one had caught his eye. But he had other reasons for being there, and the way he said it made it clear he wasn't just dropping by for the free snacks. Abel's hand came down on the table with a smack, the kind of dramatic gesture that makes everyone jump. He had something to say, and it was clear it wasn't going to be a casual chat about the weather. Abel's gaze dropped, and he let it slip that his adorable youngest brother was there, the second son of the Draker family, Lion Blade Abel Draker. But Zeke wasn't having any of that adorable nonsense. To him, Abel was the butchering knight, and the tension was thicker than a holiday feast. Their eyes locked, and the air crackled with the kind of intensity usually reserved for the final showdown in an action movie. Abel's smirk was met with Zeke's glare, and it was clear this wasn't going to be a friendly family reunion. Zeke shook his head, trying to calm the storm inside him. There wasn't much he could do right then anyway, so he took a deep breath and tried to play it cool. Zeke couldn't help but wonder if his actions had changed the future. In his past life, Abel would have never shown up during the blessing rite. It was like a plot twist in a drama, and he wasn't sure if he was the hero or the side character. If his actions had indeed changed the future, then maybe, just maybe, this was his chance. Zeke clenched his fist, determination burning in his eyes. It was time to see where this new path would lead. With his newfound determination, Zeke stepped into a world where soldiers stood in formation, ready for something big. The air was thick with anticipation as a man declared the beginning of the blessing rite. Like seriously, the vibes were intense. A voice called out for Aaron, and a nervous response echoed back. Aaron stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves like he was about to get down to business. No turning back now. Aaron was ready, sleeves rolled up, game face on. Whatever was about to happen, he was all in. With a deep breath, Aaron dipped his wand into the water. The moment of truth was here, and the air was electric with possibilities. Slowly, Aaron lifted his hand out of the water. The tension was real, and everyone was on the edge of their seats. Suddenly, another person appeared, adding to the mystery. The plot was thickening, and the suspense was killing everyone. Light began to emanate from the other person, casting an eerie glow. Things were getting serious, and the vibes were next level. A strange light filled the scene, leaving everyone in awe. The future was uncertain, but one thing was for sure: this was going to be epic. As the strange light faded, a whirlpool of energy took its place. The Drakers were about to experience something legendary, and honestly, it was going to be a big deal. Through the blessing rite, every member of the Drakers would awaken their sealed aura at the ripe age of 12. A voice called out, urging the next participant forward, setting the stage for what was to come. Unlike ordinary knights who awaken after 20, the Drakers were on the fast track. A man's voice echoed, calling for the next participant, hinting at the rare cases where something even more extraordinary would happen. Suddenly, the mana lamps flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Confused murmurs filled the air as voices questioned what was happening. This was not part of the plan. Then, a gasp broke through the confusion as red lights flared to life. The crowd was stunned, their eyes wide with disbelief. Something incredible was unfolding. A flaming sword materialized, its glow casting an eerie light across the room. The power on display was unreal. These knights weren't just strong. They were on another level, some even rivaling the legendary Red and Black Knights. The room was in chaos, energy crackling in the air as the awakening reached its peak. It was pure, unfiltered power, and everyone could feel it. A man's voice cut through the noise, demanding the special gloves. Without them, life would be anything but ordinary for these newly awakened knights. The Drakers were stepping into their destiny, and it was going to be wild. Reyna stared at her hands, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The gloves or lack thereof were a big deal, and the room seemed to hum with anticipation. The Drakers' emblem flashed across the scene, a reminder that proving pure blood descent wasn't just about a fancy title. It came with the full package: family support, endless perks, and a whole lot of drama. The crowd murmured as the next candidate stepped up. Voices buzzed with excitement, wondering what kind of awakening was about to go down. The energy was palpable. This was the main event. A single step echoed through the room. Of course, after taking down Reyna, this awakening was bound to be legendary, pure blood status guaranteed. Zeke Draker stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the statue ahead. He never thought he'd be back here, not after the last time. A flashback flickered through his mind. The last time he stood before this statue, it had been nothing short of a nightmare. All eyes were on him as he reached into the cradle. The blessing rite had been his only motivation to push through, but the memories of the struggle were still fresh. He clenched his jaw, determination burning in his eyes. He hadn't given up. He hadn't surrendered. This time it would be different. With his hands submerged in water, a smirk played on his lips as he muttered to himself, pleading with the damned bronze statue to take care of him this time. Suddenly, the knight statue trembled, as if stirred by an unseen force. The room fell silent, eyes glued to the spectacle. But just as quickly as it began, the shaking ceased. Whispers filled the air, disbelief echoing through the crowd. Had the statue really stopped? This was unheard of, unprecedented. Abel watched, eyes wide with shock. This had never happened before. Ever. All eyes turned to him, the man of the hour, the one who dared to challenge fate itself. Slowly, he lifted his hands from the water, a wry smile on his face. He knew it. Deep down, he had known it all along. He shouldn't have expected things to change. He had let that bastard make him too confident, too sure of himself. The crowd erupted into a frenzy of whispers and gasps. What was happening? He had failed to awaken the statue. Was that even possible? How could this be? As Zeke wiped his hands, the crowd's chatter grew louder. Voices in the crowd questioned how he could have beaten Reyna if his blood wasn't enough for the awakening. Some even accused him of using tricks and called him an embarrassment to the family. Zeke couldn't help but think that these people never change. Shrugging off the negativity, Zeke looked down, muttering to himself that there were plenty of other ways to get stronger besides awakenings. Suddenly, a status bar appeared, apologizing to Zeke for a delay in message processing. The status bar explained that due to an error during processing, a message had been delayed. Zeke looked on, curious about what was happening. The status bar continued, stating that necessary information had been missing from the identification terminal during class identification. But now, class information had been input using the system's authority. The terminal had identified Zeke's talent as healer, a rare class. Zeke couldn't believe his luck, thinking he was on his way to greatness. Suddenly, a red light began to emit from the knight statue, catching everyone's attention. The crowd murmured in shock, noting that the red light indicated a pure-blood awakening. They couldn't believe that Zeke was starting off with such a rare and powerful sign. As a radiant light began to emit from Zeke, the status bar popped up with some major updates. A connection was made, and suddenly, an ancient dragon's blessing sealed within his soul had been activated. The crowd's murmurs turned into full-on gasps. This was getting intense. Abel watched closely as another notification flashed. Zeke's talent of kin, fighter's blood, had been awakened. The energy in the room was off the charts, and everyone could feel something epic was about to go down. Zeke stared at the status bar in utter confusion. His awakened talents had been combined, creating something entirely new. The status bar announced the creation of a unique class, and just like that, Immortal was awakened. Zeke couldn't help but think, what in the world just happened? As Zeke stood there in confusion, the crowd around him started murmuring in disbelief. A golden light had appeared, which was not typical for a pure-blood awakening. Some even claimed to have seen a hint of red, leaving everyone puzzled and questioning what they had just witnessed. Zeke could sense the doubt in the air, but he knew better than to speak up. Any words from him might just add fuel to the fire, so he kept his thoughts to himself, letting the whispers continue. The chatter grew louder as people tried to make sense of what had happened. The mana lamp was fine, but the sword statue seemed broken. Without any mana inhibition, it couldn't possibly be a pure-blooded awakening, or so they thought. Suddenly, a clap cut through the noise, silencing the crowd. Abel turned to face the crowd, his expression lightening the mood. He couldn't believe how seriously everyone was taking this. After all, they had just witnessed not one, but two pure-blood awakenings in a single batch. Wasn't that something to celebrate? Abel's enthusiasm was contagious. He reminded everyone that this was a rare and joyous occasion, something they should all be excited about. The crowd quickly shifted their mood, agreeing with Abel. Two pure-blood awakenings were indeed a blessing, and the excitement began to build once more. Abel, now in charge, directed someone to fetch a glove for their newest member. The man nodded and hurried off to carry out the task. Zeke looked down at the gloves handed to him, feeling their weight. They were substantial, a symbol of his new status, and he couldn't help but wonder what this new journey would entail. As Zeke walked away, a voice called out for the next person to step forward, and another voice responded eagerly, ready to proceed. Abel stood nearby, a smile playing on his lips, watching the scene unfold. Zeke glanced at Abel, his thoughts a mix of skepticism and reluctant acknowledgement. Abel's presence was undeniably helpful, even if it grated on him. This whole situation felt like absolute garbage, and Zeke's frustration was written all over his face. The man concluded the blessing rite with a flourish, announcing the end of the ceremony and inviting everyone to a celebration party, urging them to enjoy. Zeke, however, was already mentally checking out, wondering where the training room was because sitting through a party was not on his to-do list. As he scanned the area, a voice called out his name, pulling him from his thoughts. Zeke turned back, surprised. He definitely hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. Abel stepped in front of Zeke, stopping him in his tracks and questioning why he was already wandering off so early into the party. Zeke was taken aback by Abel's eagerness to make contact with him. Abel's gaze sharpened as he congratulated Zeke, his tone carrying a weight that made it clear this was more than just a casual greeting. Abel extended his hand, acknowledging Zeke's pure-blood awakening with a gesture that seemed both genuine and loaded with unspoken meaning. Zeke hesitated, his reluctance clear. A handshake? Really? If he refused, his hostility would be on full display. William's voice chimed in, suggesting they play along for now. A flashback flickered through Zeke's mind, but just as quickly, he snapped back to the present. Zeke's hand hovered in mid-air, frozen in indecision. Abel's expression shifted to confusion, clearly not expecting this reaction. With a firm decision, Zeke dropped his hand, leaving Abel's offer hanging in the air. Abel's hand remained extended, awkwardly suspended between them. Abel's gaze turned cold as the silence stretched on. This was getting awkward, even for him. Zeke stood firm, refusing to shake the hand of someone he saw as scum, no matter the circumstances. Zeke's anger simmered just below the surface, his frustration growing with each passing second. Abel waved it off, trying to save face. Couldn't be helped. He'd have to settle for just seeing Zeke's face this time. Abel placed a hand on Zeke's shoulder, his tone almost casual as he said he'd see Zeke again. Zeke just managed a curt yeah, his irritation barely contained. Zeke was fuming, but Abel just repeated himself, unfazed, saying he'd see him again. As night fell, whispers of two new purebloods spread like wildfire, leaving everyone buzzing with curiosity and a hint of disbelief. At the party, the crowd was abuzz with chatter about Zeke's golden light, a sight so unexpected it had everyone questioning what they thought they knew. Rumors flew about his awakening, with some swearing he had failed at first. But the big question on everyone's mind was, where was he now? Zeke's clothes lay neatly arranged, a quiet contrast to the chaos of the party. Zeke let out a sigh of relief, feeling like he had just escaped a tight spot. The weight of the day's events still hung heavy in the air. Putting that aside, Zeke found himself in a sparkling room, the glittering surroundings a stark contrast to his troubled thoughts. Looking up, Zeke pondered how he was still standing. Pure blood awakenings were supposed to come with mana inhibition, a clear sign of opposition to the dragons, the very source of mana. But here's the plot twist: most machines run on mana, so purebloods need special gloves to function. Talk about a design flaw. Staring at his gloves, Zeke mused that if he were truly a pureblood, taking them off should have caused some serious issues. Time to check the status window. Zeke's eyes widened as he looked at his status window. This was completely different from before. Instead of mana inhibition, it showed mana reflection. What in the world was going on? Grabbing a chair, Zeke decided he needed to sit down and read it properly. This was going to take a minute. Zeke's eyes scanned the text, revealing that his skill, mana reflection, created a distortion field to nullify nearby mana. So mana could be categorized as a skill. That explained why the mana lamps were still functioning. They weren't passive skills. But what really got him was the realization that he had been a rare healer before the rite. But now he was something else entirely. Unique? Immortal? What even was that? Zeke couldn't help but grab his face in disbelief. This was not what he signed up for. His mind flashed back to the graduation ceremony. All the graduates had regular awakenings with a blue aura. It was supposed to be a straightforward process. But then there was Reina. She was the only one who had a red pureblood awakening. And now Zeke's was red too at first. But his didn't stay red. Turned gold. The system had said something about the classification terminal losing critical information. Did it mean the bronze statue? As soon as the system put in the information, the halted bronze statue began to emit a red light. That must have been what happened. The bronze statue didn't determine whether you awakened or not. It determined the user's disposition, their class. Red for a rare class and gold for unique. So that was what happened. Zeke's mind raced as he put the pieces together. The bronze statue didn't just determine if you awakened. It determined your class, your path. Red for rare, gold for unique. Zeke's fate was sealed in gold. Zeke reflected on the bronze statue, an ancient relic even predating Tarakan, the founder of the Drakers. The concept of class had faded over time, and the statue was now only used to check for awakening. The red light, once a sign of a rare class, was mistakenly labeled as a sign of pureblood awakening. No family head had ever realized the truth about the statue. Tapping his status bar, Zeke noticed something new. Karma points had appeared, something he hadn't seen before. Zeke wondered if he had seen this before, perhaps in his past. Deciding to experiment, Zeke pressed yes, curious about what would happen next. Suddenly, a flood of statuses popped up, overwhelming him with information. As Zeke scrolled through, he found a skill labeled Devour, which allowed the user to eat and digest a lot, but the description left him puzzled. Why would something like that cost 50 points? Shaking his head, Zeke decided to go for something more straightforward. He unlocked the draconian skill Dragon Eyes. Another skill caught his eye, the Might of the Dragon, but it seemed a bit too dangerous to use at the moment. He decided to save that for later. With a tap, Zeke activated his new skill, Dragon Eyes, ready to see what it could do. Zeke looked around, expecting some next-level details from his new skill, but honestly, everything seemed pretty much the same. Talk about a letdown. As he moved, he paused. Wait a minute, something was different. Zeke glanced at the garden and did a double take. The statue in the center looked like it was right in front of him, even though it was clearly far away. This could actually be pretty useful. Zeke noticed something else. Detailed information? What was going on? His gaze landed on a desk made of olive wood and a chair from the Lovern dynasty. Zeke could see in detail where everything was from. Ugh, this was getting overwhelming. Zeke staggered, feeling his body reacting strangely. What was going on? Were all draconian skills like this? Exhausted, Zeke plopped down. He couldn't even use these skills much if they left him this drained. Zeke looked around, trying to catch his breath. Suddenly, he felt a warmth spreading through him. Wait, he didn't even intend to use healing. Zeke's eyes widened as he felt something unexpected. Wait, that was definitely not right. His class skills had all shifted into passive abilities, and to top it off, their levels had increased by 1. What was going on? A smirk crept across his face as he read the description of his new passive ability, Healing Factor. His body would automatically repair itself. This was too broken. Healing had always seemed overpowered, but it wasn't something one could constantly spam, and its healing effects were limited. However, Healing Factor was infinite. This changed everything. Zeke looked at his status bar, a plan forming in his mind. He needed to test this. Grabbing a knife, he prepared for a quick experiment. With a swift motion, he made a small cut on his wrist. Blood dripped from the wound, but he watched closely, anticipation building. Almost instantly, the healing activated, sealing the cut as if it had never been there. No way, this was insane. Zeke's mind raced with the possibilities. Did the academy really take 5 whole years to finish? That seemed like a lifetime. 5 years, seriously? A sly smile crept across his face. If others took 5 years, he'd finish it in 2. Challenge accepted. Drakkar Academy, the most elite knight academy on the continent. The kind of place where people would literally give an arm and a leg to get in. And as spring rolled around, the Duchy of Troy was buzzing with life. The academy was filled with laughter and excitement as students reunited and new ones arrived. Zeke strolled through the campus, hands tucked in his pockets, observing the higher-ranked students. They were practically adults trained to perfection. But compared to those from the cradle, they still had a ways to go. Still, these were the children of the great families, and they had already established their authority. Zeke couldn't help but think how rotten these families were to the core. Among the countless branch families supporting the transcendent Drakkar family, 3 stood out as the most influential the great families. First up, the Turuan of Strength, known for their raw power and unyielding spirit. Then there were the Zimans of Wisdom, masters of strategy and knowledge. They were the brains behind many of the academy's successes. Lastly, the Vardek of Gold. Wealthy beyond measure, they held the purse strings and funded many of the academy's endeavors. Zeke couldn't help but smirk as he thought about the state of the children from those 3 powerful families. Shrugging it off, he walked away, muttering that it wasn't his problem to worry about. As he approached the entrance of the Platinum Mansion, the high-class dormitory, he couldn't help but comment on the perks of being a pureblood. The Platinum Mansion was a dormitory like no other, furnished with a training hall, a library, and various other top-notch facilities. It was exclusive, only open to the highest-ranked students, making it a big deal even for those from the cradle. Pureblood Awakeners were given a special privilege, a floor master, an entire floor known as the Platinum Floor. A woman bowed respectfully, welcoming Zeke Drakkar and mentioning that they had been awaiting his arrival. The room was filled with servants, all ready to escort him to his assigned floor, greeting him as their master. Zeke was stunned, thinking that this was a bit too much, even for a pureblood like himself. As he looked around, a man informed him that Sir Decker was waiting for him in his room. Stepping into the room, Zeke was greeted by Decker with a formal welcome. Without missing a beat, Zeke asked what the man wanted, clearly not in the mood for small talk. Decker mentioned he had something to deliver, and Zeke's curiosity was piqued. Decker gestured towards a chest, and Zeke's eyes locked onto it with a mix of anticipation and intrigue. Opening the chest, Zeke found a pair of gloves inside. As he slipped them on, he couldn't help but admire their craftsmanship, noting they were far superior to any temporary gloves he had worn before. Decker seemed relieved that Zeke approved of them. With new gloves in hand, Zeke's thoughts turned to a new sword. He wondered aloud if he should get one to match, seeking Decker's opinion on the matter. Decker agreed that it was an excellent decision. Zeke's eyes gleamed as he looked at the potential swords, already imagining the possibilities. Zeke explained that the Duchy of Troy was known for its proximity to the Giants' Mountains, which meant an abundance of high-quality iron and skilled craftsmen. He even joked that it was a running gag that the first weapon of an academy alumni was always a Trojan. Decker offered to search for a decent craftsman, but Zeke waved him off, insisting he had it covered. With a determined look, Zeke began writing something down, his mind clearly set on a plan. Finishing his note, Zeke handed it to Decker, asking him to set up an appointment with a specific person named Galleon Halbert. Decker read the letter, his eyebrows raising slightly as he admitted he had never heard of Galleon Halbert before. Nonetheless, he agreed to contact them right away. Decker then reminded Zeke about the 38 sessions starting the next day, urging him to review the relevant documents beforehand. Zeke rolled his eyes playfully, muttering about Decker always nagging, but he knew it was important. Zeke started reading the documents, realizing that the platinum floor was completely isolated. Just as he was thinking about how his draconian skills gave him a lot more freedom, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He called out, allowing the visitor to enter. A voice from the other side of the door apologized before stepping in. A woman bowed her head respectfully and informed Zeke that Floor Master Reina had sent a dinner invitation. Zeke looked confused, wondering why Reina would send him an invitation. Curiosity getting the better of him, he decided to go and see what this was all about. As he walked, he couldn't help but find the situation a bit cute, which was unusual for him. Upon arriving, Zeke saw Reina sitting down with people standing behind her. He couldn't help but quip if they were some kind of southern cartel. Reina greeted him formally, introducing herself as Floor Master Reina Turin. With a snap of her fingers, Reina mentioned that her family's people were rather peculiar. Zeke, taking it all in stride, sat down and thanked her for the concern. As the crowd dispersed, Reina suggested they dive into business after finishing their meal. Zeke, ever the gentleman, nodded in agreement. Zeke's thoughts drifted to the legendary Lightning Knight, a figure of awe and inspiration. His attention snapped back to Reina, who was emitting a powerful aura while engrossed in reading. Zeke observed her technique, noting how she fully utilized her lower abdomen to control her aura. He wondered if she had already set her sights on the position of Purple Knight. But then, he couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. Despite her impressive aura control, her swordsmanship seemed to be stuck in a rut. As food was brought to the table, Zeke sighed internally, thinking what a waste of her potential it was. Feeling a bit uneasy, Zeke let out a nervous laugh. Reina wiped her mouth after devouring her meal, and Zeke couldn't help but comment on her appetite. She had eaten far beyond his expectations. With the meal done, Reina declared it was time to get down to business. Zeke's expression turned serious as Reina urged him to accept the Turnin family's support. Zeke reminded her that they were both pure-blood awakeners. Reina countered, suggesting he had a misunderstanding about what that truly meant. Sure, they received many privileges, but that didn't translate to benefits in their growth. She pointed out that the platinum floor they stood on was proof of their privileges, but it didn't make their journey any easier. Reina dropped some truth bombs about the grind of the academy life. Centuries of know-how, personal trainers, you name it. Without these, even the richest would get left in the dust. Support families weren't just nice to have, they were a must. The platinum floor under their feet, basically useless without the right backup. She even brought up Abel Draker, a total legend and pure blood like them. Youngest white knight ever and now the black knight? Yeah, he had the Simmons family backing him up. No shame in getting a little help from your support squad. Reina wasn't done yet. The patriarch of the Turin family hadn't spilled all the details, but she knew Zeke wasn't getting any love from his maternal family. So, she laid it out plain and simple: accept the Turin family's support, Zeke. It was basically a no-brainer. But Zeke? Nah, he wasn't having it. A simple wave of his hand and a firm no was all it took. Reina was left standing there, totally dumbfounded. Like, what just happened? Zeke got up, ready to bounce. Reina tried one last time, saying it shouldn't be a bad deal for him. But Zeke wasn't budging. It wasn't about the deal. He started walking away, dropping some wisdom. He didn't need anything more than what he already had as a pure-blood awakener. It wasn't much, but in return for the meal, he had something for her. With a wave, he promised to give her the one piece of advice she needed right then. And just like that, he was gone, leaving Reina standing there, probably questioning her entire life choices. Reina stood there, still processing Zeke's sudden exit, when his voice echoed in her mind. Her sword was too strong, he said, and he had a pretty good guess about the kind of person she was. Zeke's advice started rolling in, telling her to really listen up. Her greatest strength wasn't brute force but the fluidity that came from her flexible body. Okay, that sounded a bit weird, but she rolled with it. He demonstrated, showing her how to not take attacks head-on. Instead, she should fluidly cast her opponent's attacks aside. It was like a dance, not a brawl. With a single, delicate strike, she could turn the tide. If she could master that, she would grow stronger. Like way stronger. Reina's eyes widened as she processed that last bit. Several times stronger than she was now? That was a serious power-up. Maybe Zeke's advice wasn't so bad after all. Zeke waved, gratitude in his voice as he thanked her for the meal. Reina slammed her fist down, declaring that the Thecheron family was the herald of strength and she was simply following her family's tradition. Classic family pressure, am I right? She paused, reflecting that it wasn't about being conscious of others. Then, a realization hit her. He was right. Reina stood there, lost in thought, the gears in her mind turning. She held a leaf, turning it over in her hands as she admitted that he saw right through her. Everyone had praised her as a genius when she was young, but not one person gave her any real advice. Until Zeke Draker. She looked at the leaf, her mind racing with questions. Just who was he? Meanwhile, Zeke was strolling along, flexing his newfound abilities like a kid showing off his latest toy. He couldn't help but marvel at how his changed class skills were absolutely crushing it, making him feel like an unstoppable force. And despite pulling an all-nighter training, he felt as fresh as a daisy, thanks to his insane passive ability that kept his stamina in check. No fatigue could bring this guy down. As he walked, Zeke couldn't help but reminisce about how this place used to be his personal nightmare, a hell's cape he dreaded. But now, as a pure-blood awakener, this place was like a slice of heaven. Money and power weren't everything, but this was the good stuff. He ascended the steps, taking in the view, thinking there really wasn't anything quite like this. Suddenly, he felt eyes on him. Two guys were staring at him like he was the main attraction at the zoo. Zeke turned around, and a voice called out his name, making it clear he was the center of attention. Owen walked up to him, dropping the bombshell that Zeke was part of the special class too. Well, look who it was. Owen Zimmons, the third son of the Zimmons family, one of the big three families. This guy was known for his schemes, using others to do his dirty work while keeping his own image squeaky clean. Owen started talking about how he had invited Zeke for dinner the previous night, but Zeke did not respond. He even asked if Zeke had received the invitation letter. Zeke, however, was confused by Owen's sudden friendly behavior. Zeke tried to recall if he had seen an invitation letter on his desk. Owen asked why Zeke did not reply. Zeke responded with a hint of sarcasm, questioning why he had to reply to every single invitation. Zeke's expression turned intense, his eyes reflecting a hint of irritation and bloodlust. Suddenly, a loud step echoed in the room. A man approached, commenting on Zeke's rudeness despite Owen's kindness. The man cracked his wrist while looking at Zeke, addressing him by name. Zeke, confused, asked who he was. The man covered his eyes, seemingly shocked that Zeke did not recognize him. Zeke, uninterested, remarked that those from the cradle were not worth much after all. As Zeke started to walk away, he mentioned that he understood the man wanted to look good in front of Owen, but he should be careful about who he was speaking to. Zeke blocked the man's path, ready to defend himself if necessary. Zeke swiftly slid away, putting some distance between himself and the man. He observed his opponent, realizing that high-ranking students like this one were capable of basic aura manipulation. The man declared himself as Durbin Roswell, also known as Durbin the Mighty. He announced that in place of young Master Tim, he would teach Zeke some manners. Zeke couldn't help but smile at the introduction. Durbin the Mighty? A mere cadet who wasn't even a knight yet had a pseudonym. How ridiculous. With a sudden burst of speed, Zeke used a flash step to close the gap between them. Before Durbin could react, Zeke was upon him, ready to strike. What a joke, Zeke thought as he prepared to land his hit. Zeke's fist connected with Durbin, the impact sending the self-proclaimed mighty cadet flying. Durbin coughed up blood, clearly not expecting such a swift and powerful counterattack. With a final crash, Durbin was sent flying, his body hitting the ground with a thud. Zeke stood victorious, ready for whatever came next. Durbin lay sprawled on the ground, completely out cold. Zeke stood over him, brushing off his hands with a smirk. He scanned the crowd, calling out for his next challenger, wondering who would dare step up after taking down Durbin the Mighty. His gaze landed on Owen, who hesitated under the pressure. Zeke wasn't having it, urged Owen to hurry up and make his move, already bored with the delay. Owen finally stepped forward, his expression unreadable as he made his way toward Zeke. Owen stopped just short of Zeke, shaking his head. He wasn't impressed, calling Zeke out for basking in his own glory like some over-the-top hero. Zeke watched as Owen and his crew walked away, muttering about what a joke the whole thing was. Clearly, Owen wasn't interested in stepping up to the challenge. Cut to Drakkar Academy, where the scene shifted to a sprawling campus. The school was split into two classes: the normal class, where students grinded from dawn till dusk to overcome their lack of talent, and the special class, where the elites got to pick their own subjects like it was some kind of academic buffet. Zeke had expected big things from the so-called special class, the place where the academy's top-tier students gathered. But as he looked around, his expectations quickly crashed and burned. His face fell into a look of pure disappointment. This wasn't the elite squad had been promised. Zeke scanned the room, unimpressed. Most of the students were just Cradle alumni, riding on past reputations. He scoffed. This wasn't a special class, it was just the Cradle class with extra steps. Before he could voice his thoughts any louder, a sharp command cut through the room, silencing everyone. The teacher announced that someone very special had come to encourage the freshmen of the special class. The students perked up, smiling as the teacher revealed the guest, a legendary figure, who had been the commander-in-chief during the Eastern Empire War 20 years ago. As the commander strode confidently toward the podium, the voice boomed again, hyping him up as the hero who single-handedly stopped the Empire's invasion with sheer brainpower. The grand introduction ended with a dramatic flourish. Please welcome the commander-in-chief, Dean Howard Drakkar. Howard took the stage, greeting the freshmen with a smooth smile, introducing himself as the dean of the academy. The students were starstruck, but little did they know, the flashback revealed a darker truth. The war hero Howard Drakkar was worshipped as a tactical genius, but the reality was far less heroic. Papers scattered as the truth unfolded. Howard had leaked intel to the enemy to save his own skin, but by some twist of fate, it ended up throwing the enemy into chaos. He wasn't a hero, he was just a lucky traitor. Zeke, the protagonist, looked away, his expression darkening. That rat was no hero in his eyes. From his desk, Zeke glared at Howard, his thoughts simmering. This man wasn't just a fraud, he was the reason Zeke had been kicked out of the academy. A flashback revealed Zeke's past, losing the only place he belonged, wandering across the Duchy of Troy, lost and alone. Things went from bad to worse when he was captured by slave traders and sold off to the Southern Cartel. Not exactly a glow-up moment. Back in the present, Zeke's anger flared. He wasn't about to let this slide. Payback was definitely on the menu. The teacher, oblivious to Zeke's internal storm, wrapped up the introduction, urging the students to take Howard's words to heart. Swords in hand, they were off to the arena for their first basic class. Let the training montage commence. The crew arrived at the indoor arena, ready for some dragon-slaying basics. Who knew even the special class had to start with the fundamentals? Zeke couldn't help but think about how even the elite had to start somewhere. Flashbacks hit him like a truck. His past life struggles with aura control made him spend 2 whole years mastering what others learned in just 3 months. He grabbed his head, hoping this time around would be easier. Please let it be easier. The teacher stepped up, welcoming the cadets with a stern look. This was going to be interesting. Andre Drakkar, the Rose Knight himself, introduced as their instructor for dragon-slaying basics. The name alone had the crowd buzzing. Whispers filled the room. Was that really the legendary Rose Knight? He looked so young. More murmurs followed. That was the formal Drakkar uniform. But Andre? A genius who graduated early and even aced Valhalla? The crowd was shook. Zeke couldn't believe it. Andre Drakkar, the Rose Knight, was their teacher. This was going to be a wild ride. Andre's reputation preceded Hema, once-in-a-century genius, awarded the Drakkar name despite not being a pure-blood awakener. Zeke felt the pressure mounting. Zeke started sweating. Even the teachers were on another level. And Andre was known for his inflexible personality. Great, just great. Andre shot a cold look across the room, and just like that, the chatter died down. No one dared to challenge that icy glare. Students quieted instantly, as if someone had hit the mute button. Andre's voice cut through the silence like a blade, announcing the start of class with zero room for argument. Swords were drawn in unison, the sound of steel filling the air. Andre wasn't messing around, and neither were the students. Andre's gaze swept over the room, taking in every detail. No one wanted to be on the receiving end of that look. Zeke felt Andre's eyes land on him, and he just knew he was about to get called out. Sure enough, Andre's voice boomed, questioning the sword in Zeke's hand. Zeke drew his sword with a flourish, swinging it with a bit more confidence than he felt. All eyes were on him now. Great. Zeke tried to play it cool, stating the obvious, that it was, in fact, the sword he was using. Smooth, Zeke, real smooth. Andre looked like he'd just bitten into something sour. Disgusted, he ordered Zeke onto the arena. This wasn't going to be fun. Zeke stood in front of Andre, feeling smaller by the second. Andre wasn't done, questioning Zeke about his sword choice, as if he didn't already know the answer. Zeke sighed internally, knowing he'd been caught. He tried to stand out on purpose, but now he was just standing out for all the wrong reasons. Classic. Zeke grinned, thinking he could just show off his skills and beat his instructor. Classic overconfidence. But Andre wasn't having it. The instructor looked furious, clearly not amused by Zeke's antics. Zeke's class skill, Indomitable Mental Defense, activated. Things were about to get real. Andre drew his sword, accepting Zeke's challenge with a cold stare. The message was clear: actions have consequences. Zeke smirked internally, thinking he had gotten what he wanted. Andre was going to teach him a lesson, literally. Andre pulled his sword out, laying down the law. If Zeke's blade so much as touched him, there would be more than just a lesson in humility. Andre unleashed a red aura, the intensity ramping up. Zeke gulped, realizing he might have bitten off more than he could chew. Andre declared coldly that Zeke would be exempt from not just the punishment for his rudeness, but also from the dragon-slaying basics class. The stakes had never been higher. Andre reassured that he had no intention of using his aura against the cadets. Zeke couldn't believe his luck. A class exemption was just what he needed. A smirk played on his lips as he thought about how he could beat Andre now that he knew his weakness. But then, the image of Abel staring at him flashed in his mind. Zeke realized that drawing too much attention, like he did back in the cradle, could be risky with Abel keeping tabs on him. Zeke readied his sword, planning to just graze Andre's clothes and lose. With a determined grin, he prepared for the challenge ahead. In a flash, Zeke bolted towards Andre, his speed leaving a trail of dust behind him. With a swift and calculated move, Zeke swung his sword at Andre, aiming to strike. Andre swiftly deflected Zeke's attack with precision, the clash of their blades echoing through the air. Zeke, impressed by Andre's skill, acknowledged that facing a blue knight would be no walk in the park. He readied himself for the challenge ahead. Zeke launched a flurry of attacks from multiple angles, but Andre stood firm, deflecting each strike with unwavering focus. Onlookers marveled at the intense battle, noting that Zeke's skills as an official Draker Knight were on another level. Andre hadn't even managed to graze Zeke's clothes for 30 minutes. Zeke slid back, creating some distance between him and Andre, both fighters taking a moment to catch their breath. Zeke's sword trembled slightly as he wondered about Andre's ridiculous stamina, pushing him to his limits. Andre breathed hard, suppressing his aura, struggling to accept that he was being outmatched by a cadet. Andre, looking fatigued, couldn't help but acknowledge the unfair advantage of purebloods, their existence seemingly unfair in this battle. Zeke readied himself to attack, but his stamina was as lacking as ever, and suppressing his own mana wasn't doing him any favors either. The Draker's aura cultivation method was known for its peculiarity, demanding constant activation. It had to be maintained during training, daily tasks, even while eating and sleeping, practically as natural as breathing. For Andre, it was basically second nature, like breathing. Zeke dashed forward, ready to put his plan into action. Their blades clashed, but Zeke's unorthodox swordsmanship was draining his stamina even faster. His attack was deflected back, leaving him vulnerable. Zeke found himself on his knees, but losing like this didn't feel right to him. There was no helping it. He had to force his opponent to use aura. Zeke bolted forward, swinging his sword, but his attack was blocked once again. Undeterred, Zeke leaped into the air, launching a jump attack. Zeke's jump attack didn't go as planned, and he found himself flying through the air, courtesy of Andre's counter. But Zeke wasn't about to let a little setback like that keep him down. He landed smoothly, ready to bounce back. With a burst of purple aura, Zeke bolted like lightning, leaving Andre utterly shocked. The speed was unreal, and Andre couldn't help but stare in disbelief. Zeke's movements were so swift and erratic, it was like watching someone navigate a maze at top speed. Andre was barely keeping up, his mind racing as he tried to process what he was seeing. Before Andre could fully comprehend, Zeke was behind him, slashing with a critical strike. Andre's thoughts were a mix of panic and disbelief, wondering how a cadet could possibly know such advanced techniques. Andre quickly turned, trying to face his swift opponent. As he turned, the reflection of Zeke's sword gleamed in his eyes, a stark reminder of the intense battle he was in. With a swift movement, he activated his aura step, ready to engage in the fight. Andre effortlessly dodged the main character's swing using his aura, making the main character's attack look like a total whiff. Smooth moves, Andre. Andre wasn't done showing off. He countered with a sky slice, aiming to turn the tide of the battle. The main character managed to block the attack, a smile playing on his lips. He was enjoying this challenge a little too much, perhaps. Despite his block, the force of Andre's attack sent him sliding back. The power behind that move was no joke. The students watching the intense exchange couldn't help but smile. This battle was getting good, and they were here for it. The crowd watched as Zeke's sword chipped, and he couldn't help but think that this wasn't going to end well. But then, with a smile, he admitted that the pain was really getting to him. And with that, he finally let himself collapse, the adrenaline of the fight wearing off. Zeke hit the ground, his body finally giving in to the exhaustion. Andre, sheathing his sword, looked down at Zeke with a mix of respect and amusement. He declared that this cadet, Zeke, had proven himself and no longer needed to attend classes. Andre then turned to the other cadets and asked if anyone else wished to be exempt from classes. The students remained silent, none daring to step forward after witnessing Zeke's intense battle. Andre looked at them menacingly and assumed that there were no other takers, ordering them to lift their swords. The scene then shifted to the infirmary. Zeke, laying down and recovering, thought to himself that his performance was pretty good, if he did say so himself. Zeke reminisced about his recent clash, where he managed to push Andre to tap into his reserved aura, all while earning a nod of recognition for his skills. Not bad for a day's work, he mused. With a smirk, Zeke concluded that Andre ended up in hot water, while he scored some free time. Total win-win if you asked him. But his thoughts soon drifted to Andre's final move, a technique that left an impression. That move, the most basic of the dragon-slaying arts, Chapter 1, Verse 1 Sky Slice. Simple yet effective. Coming from a blue knight, its power was nothing to scoff at. Still, Zeke was confident he could take on a blue knight, given his boundless stamina and healing abilities. Yet, he knew this wasn't enough to secure his freedom. To live unrestrained, he needed power, unbridled and unyielding power that would bow to no one. As a man snapped him back to reality, he muttered about being Arthur's youngest son. Zeke's eyes snapped open, wide with shock and confusion. Who was this guy and how did he know about Arthur? A smirk played on Zeke's lips as the man mentioned his eyes resembling Arthur's. Zeke wondered how he hadn't sensed this guy earlier, given the strong smell of booze. Zeke couldn't believe what he was hearing. This guy had the guts to call the current patriarch of the Drakers an arrogant bastard. Who was this man and how did he pull off that trick earlier? Zeke looked unsure. This guy sure acted like he owned the place. What did he mean by that? The man set his booze down, clearly not buying Zeke's act. He was feigning ignorance and it wasn't working. A flashback hit Zeke. The man had mentioned an internal wound earlier. How did he know about that? The man grinned, catching onto Zeke's healing factor. How did it heal instantaneously? Zeke was starting to get a bad feeling about this. Zeke gripped the blanket hard. No, he couldn't fall for this. There was no one at the academy who knew about healing. Zeke played dumb, denying any knowledge of what the man was talking about. The man hummed, clearly not convinced by Zeke's charade. Things escalated quickly as the man's hand moved with blinding speed, nearly slicing Zeke's head off. Yikes, this guy was serious. Zeke barely dodged the attack, leaning back just in time to avoid becoming a human kebab. Flipping over, Zeke couldn't help but think. This guy was not just some random dude. He was an assassin. Like, what the heck? Thinking fast, Zeke grabbed a nearby blanket and chucked it at the man. The man got covered by the blanket, clearly not expecting that move. He struggled, muttering about Zeke's tricks. Zeke's instincts kicked in, screaming at him to go on the offensive. The man quickly grabbed his sword, impressed by Zeke's adaptability. He tightened his grip on the sword, his eyes narrowing as he considered Zeke's skills. With a menacing look, he concluded that Zeke was almost like a mercenary. Zeke bolts back, his heart pounding like it's trying to break a world record. Sweat drips down his face as he can't help but wonder, just who the heck is this guy? A mercenary, maybe? The man spins Zeke's sword with one finger, like it's no big deal. Zeke's mind races. Could this guy know something about his past life? The man smirks, noting that a Draker has abandoned his sword and stepped back. With a flick of his finger, the man sends the sword flying back towards Zeke, casually commenting that he thinks Zeke might be better suited to be a mercenary than a knight. Zeke catches his sword, his mind reeling. Is that what he meant? He hasn't felt this way since his master trained him. After their brief fight, he's sure of it. Zeke was still processing the fight, realizing the massive gap in their abilities. He could barely keep up, and it was clear that his opponent could have ended things at any moment. This guy wasn't just strong, was at least a red knight, maybe even stronger. The man noticed Zeke's sword, recognizing it as a standard-issue claymore from the cradle. He couldn't help but wonder why someone with Zeke's talent was stuck with such a basic weapon. Just then, the door creaked open, cutting their conversation short. Zeke glanced back, hearing a voice from the doorway. So, this was where he had been all along. Zeke's eyes widened as he recognized the man standing there. Andrei? What was he doing here? Andrei introduced himself as Dexter, the garden keeper. Zeke couldn't believe if this guy was the garden keeper. As Andrei walked in, Duke didn't seem thrilled. He snapped at Andrei, asking how he even knew he was there. Andrei casually mentioned that Duke had been at the training room earlier. Duke groaned, clearly annoyed by Andrei's quick wit. Andrei turned to Zeke, telling him that if he was done getting treated, he could return. Zeke nodded, understanding the dismissal. As Zeke turned to leave, Duke called out to him. If he had time later, he should come to the Academy's western greenhouse. Duke added that he'd teach him something useful. Zeke paused, considering the offer. An awkward silence hung in the air as Zeke left, the weight of the day's events settling in. Zeke wasn't having it, though. He turned and walked out, leaving no room for argument. As the door clicked shut behind him, the Duke's voice boomed, calling out Zeke's sharp tongue and comparing him to Arthur. Classic. Zeke's mind raced as he walked away. Garden Keeper Dexter? Who did this guy think he was fooling? If he had the rank to call the current patriarch Arthur so easily, then the Duke was someone big. The Duke's words echoed in his mind, confirming his suspicions. Then he must be the guy who only had one disciple, Andrei, throughout his entire life. Duke Draker, the Gale Knight. The name alone carried weight. One of the Black Knights who had the martial force to go against a whole kingdom alone. Zeke pictured the Duke walking away from a burning town, a lone figure against the chaos. He was quite the talk of the town for disappearing one day without a word. But to think he was leading a secluded life at the academy. Maybe Andrei came here because of him. When you say Duke, you mean a man with frightening tenacity, Zeke thought as he walked. There was even a rumor that he obtained Black Knight status just because he liked the color black. That was so on-brand for the guy. Moments ago, Zeke was thinking about how Duke was showing a strong interest in him. But receiving light teaching just because of simple interest was something he had no interest in. If he was going to learn something, he wanted to learn the secret move. He was determined to change that interest into tenacity, a smile forming on his face as he made up his mind. Cut to the school where the scene was about to get educational. Professor Fannin, the Academy Magic Theory professor, was about to drop some knowledge. In a case like this, you know what happens? The cadets were sleeping, but Fannin just laughed it off. He was used to this. Fannin started drawing on the chalkboard, explaining that when forming mana formulas, you actually take damage due to the resistance. Classic magic theory, right? Zeke raised his hand, mentioning he didn't understand the mana transfer energy law Fannin had mentioned earlier. Finally, someone was paying attention. Fannin lit up, apologizing as it was his first time getting a question. He was excited to explain the concept of mana transfer. Someone called the paramedics because someone was actually interested in his class. As students started getting up, some grumbled about why they were stuck learning magic theory at a night academy, while others were just ready for a nap. But Zeke thought the lecture was surprisingly easy to follow, and it seemed like Fannin was no ordinary professor. Zeke looked around, and someone called out to him, trying to get his attention. Fannin was standing on the stairs, looking a bit off. Zeke asked what was wrong, but Fannin brushed it off, saying it was nothing much. Fannin smiled softly, admitting that he had just enjoyed a proper class for the first time in a while, thanks to Zeke. He even invited Zeke to visit his research lab anytime, mentioning his background as a Del FOA Magic University Scholarship alumnus. Zeke was impressed. He had thought Fannin wasn't just an ordinary mage, but finding out he was an alum from the Magic University of Delpho, birthplace of magic, was next level. As Fanon waved and Zeke smiled back, he thought to himself that there was nothing wrong with getting close to a mage, especially one as skilled as Fanon. Walking away, Zeke mused that mages who were good at math were usually flexible thinkers, making them better suited as colleagues than those stuffy knights. Fanon seemed like he could be useful. Zeke made a mental note to see if the professor would be an asset down the line. With a glance upward, Zeke seemed lost in thought, considering his next move. Zeke spotted Dexter and couldn't help but think that the man was way more patient than he had expected. I mean, it had been like a week, right? Dexter locked eyes with Zeke and asked if he was finally done playing around. Zeke started to question what was going on, but Dexter cut him off, wondering why he hadn't shown up at the greenhouse. Dexter gave Zeke a stern look, reminding him that he had promised to teach him some useful things. Zeke just shrugged it off, saying he wasn't interested. Classic Zeke. Am I right? Dexter wasn't having it and suddenly jumped in front of Zeke, shocked and asking why. Zeke casually mentioned that he knew Dexter was incredibly talented, but he was busy with his own training. Dexter, surprisingly, agreed and said you can't slack off when it comes to personal training. Before Zeke could react, Dexter appeared behind him, asking if that was really what he thought he'd say. Zeke quickly turned around, but it was too late. Dexter chopped Zeke on the neck and knocked him out. Smooth move, Dexter. Zeke woke up, thinking about how he didn't expect Dexter to just knock him out. Guess waiting for a week was a lot for him. He looked around and wondered if this was the Western greenhouse. As Zeke took in his surroundings, wondering if he was in the Western greenhouse, he noticed a figure drinking in the corner. The figure, Duke, casually asked if Zeke was awake, and Zeke couldn't help but wonder if he had been abducted. Duke pointed at Zeke with a smirk, confirming his suspicions. He admitted to abducting Zeke and expressed his interest in him, leaving Zeke even more confused. Duke's smile widened, clearly enjoying Zeke's bewilderment. Zeke slumped to the ground, muttering to himself that Duke wasn't normal. He could sense the man's impatience, and it made him uneasy. Suddenly, Zeke bolted away, activating his swift step skill in a desperate attempt to escape. But just as quickly, Duke appeared in front of him, playfully saying peekaboo. Zeke was not amused. Zeke tried to bolt again, but Duke was always one step ahead. Duke appeared in front of him once more, and Zeke had enough. He felt like Duke was treating him as a joke, and he didn't appreciate it. Zeke had enough of Duke's antics and looked around, wondering what it would take to finally light a fire under him. He questioned what about him had piqued Duke's interest so much. Duke, ever the curious one, pointed out that he was still hung up on how Zeke's internal wounds had healed instantly. A smirk crossed Zeke's face as he realized what had been bothering Duke all this time. With a playful challenge, Zeke put his hand on his chin and told Duke that if he was that curious, he'd have to make him answer. But just like that, Duke vanished into thin air, leaving Zeke standing there. Zeke was shocked. He couldn't believe Duke had just disappeared on him like that. He looked around, trying to figure out where Duke had gone. Suddenly, Zeke spotted something coming straight at him. He quickly dodged, his reflexes kicking in just in time. As the object flew past him, Zeke reached out and caught it, realizing it was a sword. Confused, Zeke asked what in the world was going on. Dexter stepped forward with a smirk, explaining that Zeke had told him to make him answer. But of course, that was too easy, so he proposed a bet instead, because why not add some drama to the mix? Zeke lifted his sword, ready for whatever was coming next. Duke laid out the terms: if Zeke managed to graze even a single piece of his clothes, he would grant him one wish. Zeke couldn't help but think that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. But if he gave up on this duel, he would have to spill all his secrets. Dexter's eyes gleamed with a mix of menace and bloodlust as he added the final condition: Zeke would have to tell him everything he was hiding. No pressure, right? Dexter stood there, his presence alone sending chills down the spine. Suddenly, smoke began to swirl around him, leaving Zeke wondering what this guy was even made of. Some next-level stuff, apparently. Cut to the garden, completely wrecked. Duke was losing it, muttering about how 3 hours had already passed and how Zeke wasn't just enduring, was on another level. And then, like some kind of unstoppable action hero, Zeke just got up. Duke couldn't even believe it. Zeke was fuming, but he knew he couldn't win the bet. He could go all day, but he had never tapped into the full might of the dragon. Too risky, too dangeroso, it had always been a no-go. Zeke stepped forward, realizing that this time, he could unleash his full power without hesitation. A black knight wouldn't be a problem. A purple aura began to swirl around him, smoke wafting off like he was some kind of edgy, mystical vaping champion. The vibe was intense, to say the least. Meanwhile, Duke was over there smiling like he'd just won the lottery. His gaze locked onto Zeke, and you could practically see the excitement bubbling up. Duke's grin widened, and he couldn't help but cheer. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Zeke was finally tapping into that next-level power. Zeke's purple aura flared up, fully infused and ready to go. He wasn't just standing there looking cool, was locked in and ready to attack. In a flash, Zeke bolted forward, leaving rocks flying in his wake. No time to waste, this fight was about to get real. Zeke swung with all his might, but Duke was quick, dodging just in time. The clash was on, and neither of them was holding back. Duke smirked as he effortlessly dodged Zeke's attacks, noting how repetitive they were. Sure, Zeke was fast, but compared to some of the other foes Duke had faced, he wasn't all that impressive. Still, there was something about Zeke that stood out. Duke could feel the sheer spite radiating off Zeke. It wasn't just about tenacity anymore. This guy was fueled by something deeper, something personal. Deciding it was time to step things up, Duke pondered using a bit of his aura to turn the tide of the battle. Suddenly, Zeke's hands glowed with a fierce energy as he activated the might of the dragon, catching Duke off guard. With a powerful strike, Zeke shattered his own sword, sending debris flying everywhere. A massive dust cloud filled the area, leaving Duke disoriented and wondering what just happened. Duke realized Zeke might have blocked his vision, but he also knew it would be difficult for Zeke to find him in this mess. Or so he thought. Little did Duke know, Zeke was already right behind him, ready to strike. With a fierce determination, Zeke activated his dragon eyes, locking onto his target with precision. Zeke barely had a moment to process his locked-on target before Dexter swiftly dodged his attack, moving with an almost casual grace. Zeke was left stunned, his confidence momentarily shaken as his attack missed its mark. Without hesitation, Zeke bolted towards Dexter, determined not to let him slip away again. Dexter dashed around Zeke, his movement so swift that it caused a gust of wind to ripple through the air. Zeke couldn't help but be impressed, wondering if this was the reason Dexter was known as the Gale Knight. In a blink, Dexter appeared behind Zeke, his speed leaving Zeke struggling to keep up. Zeke quickly turned and launched another attack, refusing to be outmaneuvered. But Dexter, with his incredible speed, appeared in front of Zeke once again, calling their fight a draw and leaving Zeke in awe of his opponent's skills. But the fight took its toll, and Zeke coughed up blood, feeling the strain of his incredible speed. Before he could recover, he was sent flying, crashing hard into the distance. Lying on the ground with a smile, Zeke couldn't help but think about how much he had become like his master. But the system had other plans, warning him that his fatigue had surpassed the limit and his consciousness would be forcefully shut down. As his vision began to fade, Zeke muttered in disbelief, realizing the severity of his condition. The soft glow of chandeliers filled the room as Zeke slowly regained consciousness. Groaning, he pushed himself up, feeling the ache of his battle. Looking around, Zeke recognized the familiar surroundings and wondered if Duke had brought him back to his room. With a sigh of relief, he chuckled, realizing he had almost passed out. Laying down and looking up, Zeke couldn't help but think that getting knocked out was totally on brand for a Black Knight like him. He reflected on the fight, realizing he had given it his all. Repeating the same attack over and over to lower Duke's guard, creating an opening with the might of the dragon, and using dragon eyes to strike. Yet it wasn't enough. That final skill Duke used was definitely his secret move. Sure, he got knocked unconscious for pushing his draconic skills too far, but hey, at least he got a glimpse of that secret move, right? The high-speed movement arts Duke used were impressive, to say the least. Staring up, Zeke couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret for missing the chance to learn that secret move. Still, it was worth it. He reminisced about the might of the dragon, a skill so intense it would make even a Black Knight hesitate. Most would submit instantly under its pressure. Suddenly, a status bar popped up, announcing an unopened message. Zeke wondered what it could be. Zeke's eyes widened as the status bar lit up with updates. His skill had leveled up, and his soul had apparently gained some serious strength. But the real kicker? Karma points were now a thing, and he could unlock new features with them. A minimap was on the table, but it would cost him 20 points. Not bad, but he needed to think this through. Scrolling through the options, Zeke saw that an inventory system was also locked behind 20 points. There was even a quest book, but that was a whopping 45 points. With only 40 points to his name, he had some choices to make. Zeke muttered to himself, trying to make sense of it all. The inventory seemed like the most straightforward choice. He could feel the weight of his decisions already. With a quick mental command, Zeke activated the inventory function. The system responded, explaining how he could store and retrieve items just by thinking about them. Easy peasy, right? Zeke glanced at his sword, wondering how this would work. The system chimed in, explaining that the size and weight of items mattered. He could even upgrade his inventory space with karma points if needed. With a deep breath, he focused on his sword, ready to test this out. If activating skills was as simple as thinking about them, then storing items should be just as easy. Zeke concentrated, willing the sword into his inventory. Save, 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 he chanted in his mind. And just like that, the sword began to vanish, dissolving into thin air as if it had never been there. Zeke couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and satisfaction. This system was going to be a game changer. Zeke watched as the claymore vanished, taking up just 2 of the 28 boxes in his inventory. He couldn't help but marvel at how the system determined space based on weight and size. It was like a real-life game of Tetris, but with way higher stakes. To retrieve it, he realized he just needed to think of its name or form. Easy peasy, like summoning a pizza with a single thought. Well, if pizzas were deadly weapons, that is. He had initially thought of it as a subspace storage. But this was way better. It was like having a magical closet that organized itself. Who wouldn't want that? Zeke reminisced about how expensive that artifact was, but finding a place to store it had been a nightmare. Now, he could even increase the inventory space using points. It was like leveling up in a video game, but with real-life consequences. This overpowered function was only a low-rank administrator function. He wondered what would happen when he reached a higher rank. If the worth of these points was this high, he couldn't just spend them willy-nilly. He needed a strategy, like saving up for a rainy day or a really cool sword. Zeke decided he would have to change up his plans. Flexibility was key, after all. He couldn't just stick to one plan like it was a New Year's resolution. Just as he was deep in thought, Decker's voice interrupted him, asking if he could come in. Zeke, slightly surprised, told him to enter. It was like getting a notification while in the middle of an intense gaming session. Zeke put down his sword and asked what it was. Decker mentioned there was a message for him. Zeke couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and anticipation. It was like receiving a mysterious letter in a role-playing game, and he was ready to find out what quest awaited him next. Decker handed over the letter with a hint of mystery, mentioning that the sender was someone Zeke would recognize: Garden Keeper Dexter. Zeke's face lit up with a smile, clearly intrigued by the name. As he read the letter, it turned out to be from Duke, basically saying that their last encounter wasn't a total fail and Zeke could challenge him anytime. Zeke couldn't help but flash back to their last meeting where Duke had said something about a draw. Was that what he meant? But either way, Zeke was just glad the opportunity wasn't gone yet. Decker bowed slightly and mentioned he had one more thing to share. He had found the blacksmith Zeke had been looking for. Zeke's eyes widened with excitement and he asked when the appointment was. Decker adjusted his glasses and hesitated, saying there was a problem. Zeke was stunned as Decker revealed that the blacksmith had refused the appointment. What? How could this be? The scene shifted to a quiet house, seemingly ordinary from the outside. But inside, it was a different story. Weapons were scattered all over the room, and Decker explained that the blacksmith didn't want to meet. Decker led the way to a man passed out surrounded by empty bottles. The blacksmith was clearly not in the mood to craft anything, let alone weapons. Zeke Draker arrived at a house, muttering about how it had been a while since he last visited. Taking in the sight of the place, he couldn't help but chuckle at the grand name given to such a modest workshop. Stepping inside, Zeke called out, wondering if anyone was home. A flashback hit him, remembering the man who had once crafted a weapon for him. Snapping back to the present, Zeke found the man chugging a bottle, clearly not in his best state. Zeke couldn't believe the sight before him, wondering what had happened to the once great blacksmith. As Zeke tried to process the scene, the man suddenly noticed him, squinting in disbelief. He couldn't believe his eyes, muttering about how this was no place for a kid and telling him to get lost. The man was none other than the renowned blacksmith of the Soul, Galleon Halbert. Zeke looked around the shop, trying to make sense of the situation. Galleon was known for his moody temperament, but this was on another level. He couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the blacksmith before he arrived. Spotting a bucket of water nearby, Zeke had an idea. With a swift move, Zeke splashed the water onto Galleon's face. A smirk played on Zeke's face as he asked if Galleon was awake now. Galleon looked at Zeke, still trying to process the situation. Zeke wasn't having any of it and demanded to know why his commission had been rejected. Galleon's eyes widened as he looked at the emblems on Zeke's clothing, recognizing the name Draker. In an instant, Galleon's demeanor changed. He bowed his head, apologizing profusely for his earlier rudeness. Galleon remained bowed, his voice heavy with regret as he explained that he wasn't taking commissions. He struggled with the idea of creating something for someone else when he couldn't even craft what he truly desired for himself. Zeke couldn't help but notice Galleon's trembling hands. It dawned on him that even someone as skilled as Galleon had faced similar struggles in the past. A flashback revealed that Galleon had already been the greatest blacksmith on the continent when Zeke first met him. Zeke's gaze fell on a shield, realizing that Galleon probably didn't want to share his embarrassing past. But he knew he couldn't just wait around for 10 years for Galleon to open up. Galleon was caught in a spiral of negative self-talk, berating himself under his breath. Snapping out of his self-deprecating thoughts, Galleon quickly apologized for his disrespectful behavior. Zeke reassured him, expressing his interest in seeing some of Galleon's past failures. With a nervous stutter, Galleon agreed to guide Zeke to the back. Zeke felt a sense of determination, knowing he had to guide Galleon back to the right path himself. As they walked through the cluttered workspace, Galleon apologized for the mess. Zeke brushed it off, assuring him that it was fine. Zeke glanced around at the swords scattered all over the field and remarked that it was charming. Galleon stuttered out a grateful thanks, clearly a bit flustered. Zeke casually strolled through the field of swords, pausing for a moment as if something had caught his attention. As Zeke picked up a sword, Galleon quickly warned him to be careful, explaining that even the failed works were still sharp. Zeke tossed the sword aside, noting that the quality was similar to the ones he forged when he was considered the best on the continent. Yikes, talk about a flex. With a sudden flash, Zeke's dragon eyes activated, and he muttered to himself that things were as he thought. Galleon stood there stunned as Zeke turned to him and asked if there was a problem with his brazier. Galleon stammered, trying to figure out how Zeke knew that. But Zeke just repeated his question, clearly expecting an answer. Galleon stared at Zeke, who then asked if he utilized his own style of smelting. The tension in the room was getting real. Zeke Draker eyed the swords, noting how several metals had been mixed to create a lighter and more exquisite material. But as he shattered one of the swords, it was clear that the durability was seriously lacking. Galleon stared at the broken sword, as Zeke explained that impurities hadn't been properly eliminated during the heat treatment process. Galleon then looked at Zeke, seemingly gathering his thoughts. Suddenly, Galleon blurted out, calling Zeke sire, and mentioning that his question might be a bit random. He then asked if he could ask Zeke something, looking a bit nervous. They walked into a room filled with books and armor, with Zeke asking what Galleon wanted to show him. Galleon pulled out a blueprint, looking like he was about to reveal something big. Zeke glanced at the blueprint, his eyes scanning over the intricate details. Little did he know, this was Galleon's secret, something he would only reveal years later. It was a blueprint of a magic brazier, a device that could change everything. Zeke's mind flashed back to a memory of Galleon's smithing, laughing as he revealed his secret. A brazier where the temperature could be freely adjusted through magic. It was his secret, his masterpiece. Zeke told Galleon about the secret, explaining how it would make his smelting method work perfectly. Galleon, excited, knew Zeke would recognize its potential immediately. But then, Galleon's expression turned uneasy. He asked Zeke why he wasn't making it, despite having the full blueprints. Galleon explained that the most important part, the mana energy law blueprint, was still missing. And then there was the magic tower's exorbitant fee. Zeke's eyes widened as Galleon revealed the cost. 10,000 gold. Zeke thought about how a normal 4-member family's monthly living expenses were only 10 gold. That was 1,000 times as much. Zeke couldn't believe it. It must have taken Galleon 10 years to gather that much money. The price was absolutely absurd. Galleon, looking serious, told Zeke that was why he wanted to ask him something. He was a Draker, and a pure-blooded awakener at that. Galleon laid out his offer with dramatic flair, promising a lifetime of unconditional service if Zeke would just make him the brazier. Zeke, though, wasn't buying if this was some next-level trickery. Zeke pondered the situation, realizing that being the family's guardian knight could make it possible. But even as a pureblood, he knew he couldn't get the support he needed. Still, giving up on Graham, the Sword of Radiance, wasn't an option. Galleon's issue seemed to be tangled up in mana energy laws, which gave Zeke an idea. A smirk crossed Zeke's face as he realized something. Mana energy laws? That was the key. Zeke rolled up the blueprint with a decisive air and declared he would accept Galleon's offer. Galleon stuttered in disbelief, barely able to contain his excitement. Zeke casually mentioned he could ask a favor from a mage he knew and would let Galleon know when he got an answer. But before he finished, he cut himself off, telling Galleon to stop drinking. Galleon, now looking at Zeke with tearful admiration, thanked him profusely, vowing to serve him for the rest of his life as his savior. Zeke just shook his head, knowing he had just gained a very enthusiastic, if slightly tipsy, ally. Zeke tried to calm down Galleon, who was still sobbing and thanking him repeatedly. Finally, Zeke snapped, telling him to stop already. A carriage waited nearby, ready to take them to their next destination. As they arrived at the Draker Academy Professor Research Buildings, Zeke couldn't help but grumble about the high commission fees the Mage Tower had charged. He muttered to himself about how simple the structure should have been. Zeke's thoughts drifted to Fanon, recalling that his major had been the design of mana energy laws. His research lab was somewhere around here. He turned to look around, trying to get his bearings. A noise from a nearby alley caught his attention. Zeke's curiosity was piqued as he wondered what was going on in there. Suddenly, a flashback hit him, memories flooding back. In his mind, he was pleading, apologizing, and taking the blame for something. It was all his fault, and he was desperate to make things right. Leon looked absolutely furious, like someone had just told him his favorite series was getting a live-action remake and they cast the worst possible actor. Zeke was on his knees, tears streaming down his face as he begged for forgiveness. He apologized profusely to Sir Leon Conrad, even going as far as saying he should put a hand on himself as punishment. Leon wasn't having any of it. He casually placed his foot on Zeke's head, pushing him down further. He agreed with Zeke's self-punishment suggestion, but with a twist of his own. With a grin that could only be described as sadistic, Leon offered Zeke a reward for his apology. He would give him the opportunity to clean up the land he dirted. Zeke, in his desperate state, thanked him. As Zeke thought about the past, he couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards Leon's offer, no matter how twisted it was. Snapping back to reality, Zeke walked towards the alley, muttering to himself about his luck. Suddenly, a voice shouted out, calling him vermin. The voice continued, saying that Zeke was just like the person he was punching, simply by existing. Talk about a reality check. Leon was fuming, realizing that Zeke was just like him. An unprecedented golden light reaction? What was that supposed to mean? Leon slammed someone's head down, yelling about a pure-blooded awakening that surpassed all others. He wasn't having any of that nonsense. Leon was losing it, wondering how some recessive guy who beat him by luck could possibly be like him. Meanwhile, Zeke was just strolling along, totally chill. He spotted someone and called out, "Hey, Freckles." Zeke smiled, asking if they had already found a replacement for him. Like, seriously? Then he stopped, his expression changing. Zeke's eyes turned menacing as a purple aura started emitting from him. He gave them 3 seconds to plant their heads on the ground. Talk about a glow-up. The cadets cautiously approached Zeke, the air thick with tension and that unmistakable purple glow. Leon pointed at Zeke, calling him out for the major attitude shift ever since his supposed pure-blood awakening. Before he could even finish his sentence, Zeke shut him down with a glare. Zeke's eyes darkened with bloodlust as he ordered Leon to drop down, the threat hanging heavy in the air. Leon felt a chill run down his spine, the sheer pressure from Zeke's aura making him visibly shaken. Sweat beading on his forehead, Leon stumbled back, muttering about the overwhelming pressure Zeke was emitting. Leon's mind raced, flashing back to just a few months ago when things were different, when Zeke wasn't this terrifying. But now, Leon's fear quickly turned to fury as he shouted, refusing to be talked down to by someone he still saw as inferior. Leon wasn't playing around anymore. With a furious command, he ordered the cadets to attack the protagonist, their movements swift and aggressive. Zeke just stood there, staring them down with a calm intensity. He let out a sigh, almost like he was disappointed, and warned them not to blame him for what was about to happen. The first attack came in fast, but Zeke was quicker. He dodged the punch with ease, almost like he saw it coming from a mile away. Without missing a beat, Zeke countered, his fist connecting with one of the lackeys. The guy didn't even see it coming. One punch was all it took, The lackey went down hard, sprawled out on the ground like a ragdoll. Zeke didn't stop there. He turned to the next attacker, his fist flying out and connecting with another lackey. With a swift move, Zeke flipped another lackey over his shoulder. It was like watching a choreographed dance, but way more intense. Zeke wasn't done yet. He grabbed a lackey and chucked him at another like a ragdoll, sending them both crashing down in a heap. With a quick pivot, he drove his knee into another lackey's gut, dropping him like a sack of potatoes. 2 more lackeys rushed him, but Zeke didn't even break a sweat. A swift punch to the first, then a spin and another punch to the second both hit the ground before they knew what happened. A lackey tried to sneak up behind him, but Zeke was way ahead. A well-placed kick sent the lackey flying, skidding across the floor like a pebble on a pond. Leon watched from the sidelines, his face pale, his hands shaking. The scene unfolding before him was nothing short of terrifying. Zeke turned his gaze toward Leon, striding through the sea of fallen lackeys like it was no big deal. He assured Leon that there was no need to be scared, that he was sure Leon already knew what was coming. Leon, trembling like a leaf, drew his sword, trying to muster some courage. Zeke kept advancing, calmly mentioning that it would only hurt for a moment. Leon's voice cracked as he yelled for Zeke to stay away, threatening to cut him if he came any closer. But let's be real, Leon looked like he was about to faint, not fight. Zeke fixed Leon with a cold stare, calling him out for drawing his sword in the training arena. Like, seriously? That was a major no-no, and Zeke made sure Leon knew exactly what that meant. Zeke drew his own sword, ready to face Leon's murderous intent. Leon, suddenly realizing he might have bitten off more than he could chew, tried to backpedal with a shaky apology. Zeke's aura turned murderous as he declared his intent to retaliate in the name of honor. Leon's soul practically left his body right then and there. Zeke laid down the rules: the battle would end only when one of them faced death, and both would take full responsibility for their actions. No takebacks, no do-overs. He turned to Liam, who was just getting up, and declared him as the witness to this epic showdown. With a dramatic flourish, Zeke dragged his sword, ready to continue the battle. Leon, now on his knees, literally pissed himself and dropped his sword, begging Zeke to let him go. Talk about a total meltdown. Trembling and barely holding it together, Leon continued to plead, hoping against hope that Zeke would show some mercy. A flashback hit Zeke as he remembered Leon's desperate pleas, begging for his life, apologizing over and over. Zeke walked up to Leon, thinking about how foolish he was. With a swift motion, Zeke slashed Leon. Leon's ear was cut off, and Zeke casually mentioned that he would be taking his ear as payment. Leon cried out in pain, holding his ear, shocked by what had just happened. Zeke grabbed Leon's head and warned him that if his ear was reattached by the time they met again, he would be taking something much more valuable next time. With a murderous stare, Zeke made it clear that next time, it wouldn't be his ear, but his head. Zeke wasn't playing around this time. With a swift move, he slammed Leon's head down, making sure he wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. And just like that, Leon was out cold, lights out, game over. Zeke started to walk away, leaving Leon in his unconscious state. But then, a faint voice called out to him. Zeke turned around, his expression a mix of curiosity and annoyance. The voice, barely a whisper, asked why. Liam, now conscious, looked at Zeke with a mix of confusion and gratitude, asking why he had helped him. Zeke, ever the stoic, brushed it off, telling Liam not to worry about it. But then Zeke dropped a truth bomb. He wasn't helping Liam. He was helping himself. As Zeke walked away, he caught a glimpse of his old self. He pondered if Galleon's influence was rubbing off on him, making him soft. The scene shifted to the academy, where Zeke almost blurted out something embarrassing. Classic Zeke, always a step away from a cringe moment. At the academy's Galleon research lab, Zeke couldn't help but wonder if his plan would actually work. The stakes were high and the pressure was on. Zeke stared at the blueprint, his mind racing with possibilities. The professor cut straight to the chase, insisting that Zeke's idea was actually feasible. Zeke, eager to get started, was ready to hand over the project right then and there. But the professor wasn't having it. He wanted Zeke to hear him out first because, of course, there was a catch. The professor launched into his explanation. The overall design was simple enough, but the core responsible for power output, that was a whole different story. The core was the heart of the machine, but the circuit had some seriously tricky restrictions. It might be small, but it needed a ton of power. and they'd need a way to adjust the output without any delay. No big deal, right? Wrong. Zeke was starting to realize this was way more complicated than he thought. The professor dropped the bomb. This was unprecedented. Zeke couldn't help but wonder, was it even possible? The professor assured him there were two options. Given the core's condition, he could personally adjust Zeke's design. Zeke perked up, thinking maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. But then the professor dropped another bombshell. It would take at least a decade to redo the design for the core. Zeke's eyes widened in shock. 15 years? The professor confirmed it. It would take an incredible amount of time. Zeke's heart sank. As for the second method, they could avoid designing the core altogether and use an alternative material. This would save a lot of time, but the material needed was a high-compression mana stone. Zeke's mind was spinning. This was going to be a lot harder than he thought. Zeke jumped up in shock, his mind reeling. An ancient artifact? Those were supposed to be impossible to make now. But the professor confirmed it. Ancient relics were already rare. Finding artifacts in ruins was even harder, the professor explained. And to find a mana stone that could withstand their design? That was like finding a needle in a haystack. Zeke's shock turned to disbelief. The cost? Over 3,000 gold. That was more than he could ever afford. Zeke's thoughts spiraled. If anyone found out he couldn't use aura, he might get kicked out. But 15 years was way too long to wait. He grabbed his head, the pressure mounting. 3,000 gold was too high. He couldn't just give up on Graham, the Sword of Radiance. Zeke paused, thinking back to his past. Ether was a difficult power for humans to control. Zeke couldn't use any sword skill that utilized aura, except for Spirit of the Soul. Compared to Ether, aura was easier to use and more versatile. Zeke looked down, frustration etched on his face. How was he supposed to get a high-compression mana stone? The professor, lost in his admiration, couldn't help but gush over the blueprints. The creator's genius was evident. Even with the complex core, the design was surprisingly efficient. Zeke looked up, his mind racing. The professor continued, explaining how even during the Golden Age, creating something like this would have been a challenge. Suddenly, a light bulb went off in Zeke's head. A smile spread across his face as he realized he had been overcomplicating things. With a polite bow, Zeke asked the professor to take care of the designs while he was away. The professor was confused, asking if Zeke expected him to take 15 years to complete the design. Zeke chuckled, shaking his head as he began to walk away. The professor's assumption was way off. With a confident smile, Zeke turned back, declaring he'd bring back a high-compression mana stone. Like, duh, why didn't he think of this before? As Zeke ventured on, dragons soared through the skies, their wings casting shadows over the land below. No big deal, just your average Tuesday with giant lizards flying around. Back in the day, the Liberation War went down, a massive showdown to break free from dragon rule. Terrakin Draker, the ultimate dragon slayer, took down the evil dragon Bahamut. Talk about a power move. After the dust settled, ancient relics were uncovered in the dragon's lair. Fancy treasures hidden away, just waiting to be found. Cut to the Draker's Academy Central Library, a place packed with knowledge and probably a few too many overdue books. Deep in the record room, relics from the Golden Age were discovered, gathering dust but holding secrets of the past. Who knows what kind of ancient drama went down with those? In the Central Library records room, Zeke Draker realized that nobody had discovered the relics yet, nor were they even aware of them. Talk about an untouched treasure trove. Zeke sighed, looking around. He could search all day and still not find what he was looking for. The struggle was real. Time to bring out the big guns. Zeke activated his dragon eye, hoping it would give him an edge in this ancient game of hide and seek. With his dragon eye active, Zeke scanned the library, his gaze piercing through the dust and shadows. Then something caught his eye. A glimmer, a hint, something that stood out from the rest of the ancient clutter. Bingo! Zeke had found what he was looking for. The hunt was finally over. Zeke tapped the floor, muttering some ancient words. The moment he tapped it, he knew he had found the right spot. Yes, this was it. With a purple aura emanating from his hand, Zeke prepared to make his move. The relic was within his grasp, and he was ready to claim it. Zeke wasn't playing around. With a swift motion, he sliced through the floor like it was a sheet of paper. The relic was close, but he wasn't about to let anything stand in his way. But using the soul of the spirit took a toll on him. Zeke felt himself being drawn back, the power surging through him like a tidal wave. He realized that maybe he had bitten off more than he could chew. Regrouping, Zeke entered the depths of the ruins. The air was thick with anticipation, and he knew he was getting closer to his prize. With a flick of his wrist, he closed the hole behind him. No turning back now. It was just him, the torchlight, and the ancient ruins. As he walked deeper, he couldn't help but think that the newsletter had seriously downplayed the depth of this place. It was like scrolling through a never-ending feed. Suddenly, Zeke's senses tingled. Something was off. He wasn't alone down here. Two shadowy figures moved through the dark hall, their presence unexpected and unwelcome. Zeke thought it should be at least a decade before someone found these ruins, but clearly, someone had beaten him to the punch. Zeke activated his special eye, the one that saw more than meets the ordinary eye. Could someone have found this place before him? The plot thickened, and Zeke was ready to uncover the truth. Zeke's special eye revealed something unexpected: two skeletons, armed and seemingly ready for action. Skeletons? This was not what he had in mind when he thought about uncovering the truth. Upon closer inspection, Zeke noticed the weapons they were holding. Shovels and pickaxes? Seriously? Well, at least it wasn't the work of a lich. That would have been way too extra. Zeke materialized his sword, ready for action. If these skeletons weren't here to cause trouble, then he would just have to make sure they didn't get in his way. With a swift move, Zeke swung his sword and sent one skeleton's head flying. One down, one to go. Not missing a beat, Zeke turned to the other skeleton, and with another swift strike, it too was defeated. Looks like these skeletons were no match for Zeke's skills. Zeke suddenly remembered that he could earn points by defeating monsters. It had completely slipped his mind because he was so focused on the artifact. Zeke's eyes gleamed with excitement as he thought about farming for points. The idea of leveling up and unlocking new abilities had him feeling a bit crazy. 20 skeletons later, Zeke was feeling pretty confident. This was turning out to be easier than he thought. Zeke decided to check out what he could unlock with his points. The beginner quest book was 45 points, and the mini-map was 40. The draconian skill, Devour, and the level 2 locked skill each required 50 points. Looks like he could only afford the mini-map for now. With a quick purchase, Zeke's mini-map was activated. Time to explore and farm more points. Zeke squinted at the mini-map, totally giving off that "I'm about to uncover ancient secrets" vibe. It kind of looked like one of those magic maps from fantasy games, you know, the ones that glow and stuff. He pointed at something on the map, his face all scrunched up in confusion. What was that thing? It was like when you're trying to read a menu in a foreign language and you're just pointing at random stuff hoping for the best. Suddenly, the map did this super cool thing where it went from 2 dimensions to 3. It was like when you put on those 3-dimensional glasses and the whole world just pops out at you. Zeke couldn't help but smile. He was totally vibing with this map. It was like he had just unlocked the ultimate cheat code in a video game. But then he noticed something weird. There was this one room on the map that was totally different from all the others. It was like when you're scrolling through Netflix and there's that one thumbnail that just doesn't fit. He couldn't help but wonder why it was so different. And then, the system asked if he wanted directions to some place called the Grave of the Dragonslayer storage room. Zeke was mind-blown. It took others forever to find this place, but he had just stumbled upon it like it was no big deal. It was like finding a hidden level in a video game that no one else knew about. Without hesitation, he clicked yes. He was ready to explore this mysterious room. The map started giving him directions like a super helpful GPS. It was like having a personal tour guide leading him straight to the treasure. Zeke couldn't believe his luck. He was laughing and everything. It was like he had just won the lottery, but instead of money, he was getting an epic adventure. Zeke stared at the map, wondering if his luck had finally run out. He couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, he had finally lost his way. Arriving at a massive gate entrance, Zeke felt a mix of awe and frustration. He was here, but how on earth was he supposed to get inside this place? Pushing against the door, Zeke quickly realized that brute force wasn't going to cut it. The door wasn't budging an inch. Suddenly, a red light emitted from the door, casting an eerie glow on Zeke's face. Zeke yanked his hand back, realizing he had almost fallen victim to a security spell. Close one. Looking at his hands, Zeke let out a sigh of relief. His gloves had saved him from losing a hand. Talk about a close call. Zeke glanced back at the gate, feeling a bit defeated. There was no way he could get through that spell. With a hint of desperation, he called out to the system, hoping for a miracle. Just as Zeke was about to give up, the system suddenly responded. announcing that it had received his request and was connecting to the security device. The automatic activation failed, but it was switching to manual mode. Zeke couldn't believe his ears. Was the system actually responding to him? Zeke's confusion grew as he wondered if the system was really responding to his previous statement. The system confirmed his thoughts, addressing him as Administrator Zeke Draker and asking if he had any more requests. Seizing the opportunity, Zeke asked the system why it had forced him to regress. However, the system responded that it couldn't answer that question, leaving Zeke even more puzzled. Not giving up, Zeke tried a different approach, asking what the administrator system was. But once again, the system responded that it couldn't answer the question, leaving Zeke frustrated. Zeke attempted another question, asking who made the system. But as expected, the system responded with the same message, unable to provide an answer. This was getting him nowhere. The system asked if Zeke had any more requests. Zeke, scratching his head in frustration, muttered about not getting answers to any important questions. He decided to cut to the chase and simply asked the system to open the door. The system confirmed his request and announced that the grave of the Dragonslayer storage room had been opened. The gate creaked open, revealing what lay beyond. Zeke's eyes widened in disbelief as he took in the sight before him, utterly stunned by the revelation. Treasure chests, glittering and ancient, filled the room, and Zeke could hardly contain his excitement. As expected, the chest was brimming with valuable relics and treasures, a true haul fit for a Dragonslayer. Zeke eagerly opened the chest, his curiosity getting the better of him. Gold and jewelry sparkled under the dim light, and Zeke couldn't help but laugh in delight. There was actually something inside. He started looting, picking up items and examining them, musing over their potential uses. A smile spread across his face as he found something perfect for Fanon, finally feeling like his search had paid off. Among the treasures were high-compression mana stones. Not just one, but 4 of them, making the find even more incredible. Zeke decided to use 1 point to expand his inventory by 4 slots. He figured that should be enough space for everything. With a sigh, he realized he would have to come back here regularly until he graduated. As Zeke prepared to leave, a dark energy started creeping up on him. He felt like he had done enough for the day and it was time to head back. Suddenly, Zeke felt an unusual presence. Something was off, and he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Zeke looked around, trying to pinpoint the source of the strange feeling. The darkness around him seemed to be closing in. The ominous feeling grew stronger, wrapping around him like a cold embrace. Zeke couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Suddenly, Zeke's hand lit up with a red glow. He stared at it, confused and a bit alarmed. Quickly, he pulled his hand away, but the damage was done. Magic circles started appearing all over his body. Zeke's eyes widened in shock. What in the world was happening to him? This was definitely not on his bingo card for the day. Just as Zeke was trying to process the unexpected turn of events, he found himself abruptly teleported away from the treasure room. Well, that escalated quickly. Zeke Draker found himself suddenly teleported, landing with a thud in an unfamiliar place. Looking around, confusion painted his face as he wondered where the heck he was. The system chimed in, revealing he was at the home of the Dragonslayer. Zeke was baffled, muttering about how he never saw anything about this place in the newsletter. Like, what even was this place? He pulled out a map, trying to get his bearings. After a moment of thought, Zeke realized he wasn't too far from his previous location. But there was no clear path to the home of the Dragonslayer. This was going to be interesting. Zeke wasn't about to ignore this place, so he decided to push the tomb, hoping for some answers or maybe just a shortcut. To his surprise, there was an armor inside the tomb. Before he could even process what he was seeing, a system message popped up, announcing that he had found some exclusive Dragonslayer equipment. Zeke picked up the armor, feeling its weight and wondering what made it so special. As he analyzed it, he noticed it was different from the armor of the Golden Age. He couldn't help but wonder what this was all about. Then he spotted a hole or something that looked like one. This was getting more interesting by the minute. Zeke materialized a mana stone, thinking he couldn't just let this opportunity pass. He had a hunch about what might happen next. The mana stone lit up, and a system message confirmed that he had installed a mana battery in the Dragonslayer exclusive equipment, activating it. Suddenly, the eyes of the armor lit up, signaling that something extraordinary was about to happen. The armor suddenly jolted to life, moving in a jerky, unpredictable manner as if it had just woken up from a centuries-long nap and was still trying to find its footing. Zeke Draker stood there, eyes wide, clearly thinking that this was not the kind of morning he had signed up for. Before he could even process what was happening, a massive green explosion rocked the room. A system message blared in his mind, explaining that an overload caused by equipment failure had led to the activation failing spectacularly. Zeke shook off the dust, muttering about how the explosion had already happened. Thanks very much. The system apologized, but honestly, it felt a little, too late. Zeke brushed himself off, trying to regain some dignity. He turned his attention back to the armor, now lying motionless again. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of power source this thing had been using. A high-compression mana stone? That was some serious juice for an ancient relic. Zeke walked around, pondering what kind of features this armor could possibly have that required such a massive energy source. He made a mental note to ask Fanon about it later. For now, he had more exploring to do. The other rooms had been empty, so this seemed to be the last one on his list. Stepping into the large room, Zeke's eyes landed on a lone glass cube. It was the only thing occupying the vast space, looking suspiciously out of place. He couldn't help but wonder what was up with that. Zeke glanced at his system bar, expecting some sort of explanation. But nope, nothing. Just his luck, right? Suddenly, beads of sweat started forming on his forehead. The name Tarek Draker popped into his mind, sending a chill down his spine. This guy was on a whole other level of crazy, and Zeke couldn't shake off the eerie feeling. And then he saw it, Bahamut, the cursed light dragon, just chilling there. His system finally decided to chime in, announcing the legacy of Tarek Draker and the discovery of Bahamut's heart. About time it said something useful. The heart of the dragon was surrounded by a soft, ethereal light. It looked both mesmerizing and terrifying at the same time. Zeke couldn't take his eyes off it. He recalled the ominous feeling he got when he first entered the room. It was like his gut was trying to tell him something, but he just couldn't put his finger on it. Despite the unease, Zeke took a deep breath and started walking forward. He had come this far, there was no turning back now. As Zeke pressed on, the heart of Bahamut began to react to his presence, pulsing with an eerie glow. Zeke stood stunned as a voice echoed in his mind, claiming it had no choice. Okay, that's not creepy at all. He locked eyes with the heart, the voice ringing out again, this time with a single word: understand. Like, where was this coming from? Suddenly, a system alert blared in his mind. Class skill Indomitable Mental Defense had been activated. Well, that sounded fancy. Zeke clutched his head, a sharp pain shooting through his skull. This was not the time for a headache. His left eye darkened, a creepy black spreading across it. Not exactly a fashion statement. Darkness started to surround him, and Zeke couldn't help but panic. What the hell was going on? The darkness grew larger, swallowing everything around him. Zeke's mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos. This was so not how he expected things to go. Just as the darkness began to consume him, a system error blared in his mind. Skill activation failed. Well, that was just perfect. As if things couldn't get any worse. Voices echoed in his head, chanting "kill them all." Zeke, already having a bad day, slammed his head as if that would somehow silence the noise. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Suddenly, Zeke found himself face to face with a darkness version of himself. Great, just what he needed, his own shadow giving him attitude. The dark Zeke started mumbling about freedom and calling him a dumbass. Rude. Much? Zeke barely had time to process his dark doppelganger's existential rant before he was already kicking its butt. Victory notifications popped up, announcing his win against the Light Dragon's curse and the completion of some urgent quest. As a reward, he scored ownership over something called Tarakan's dying gift. Zeke let out a sigh of relief, thinking that could have totally gone way worse. But plot twist, victory hangover hit him like a truck. Zeke dropped to his knees, freaking out that his skills almost failed him. What the heck was that all about? Just as he was spiraling, his healing factor and infinite stamina skills kicked in, saving him from a full-on meltdown. Exhausted, Zeke looked up as a new notification popped up. Apparently, he had started absorbing something called the Heart of the Cursed Light Dragon, Bahamut. Great, more cryptic dragon stuff. Just what he always wanted. Suddenly, the heart lit up like a Christmas tree, glowing with an eerie light that made Zeke's tired eyes widen. Before he could even process what was happening, a red aura engulfed him, setting his entire body ablaze. Zeke was officially glowing, and not in the just aced a test kind of way. The red aura wasn't just for show, it sent Zeke flying like a ragdoll in a hurricane. Not exactly the superhero landing he was hoping for. Zeke was still wrapped in that fiery red glow, looking like a human torch. He realized something was off. He didn't have the magical circles needed to accept mana, so why was he lit up like a Christmas tree? The red aura wasn't just clinging to him, it was everywhere, like someone had set the world's brightness to max. Then, out of nowhere, his hands started glowing purple. Because why not add another color to the light show? Zeke activated something called the Spirit of Soul Seal. Fancy name, but would it actually do something useful? Zeke wasn't messing around. His heart started glowing like a literal light bulb, and he declared he'd use ether to cover the mana. Okay, science time, but make it magic. And just like that, he was trying to seal it in an ether hole. Sounded complicated, but Zeke made it look easy. Plot twist. A massive explosion rocked the place. Guess the seal didn't go as planned. The aftermath? A crater and a whole lot of smoke. Zeke's plan had some serious side effects. Then, red lightning started crackling around the smoke. Dramatic much? And from the chaos, Zeke rose up, looking a bit worse for wear, but still standing. Classic hero move. Zeke glanced down and noticed a strange mark on his stomach. He winced slightly, muttering to himself in confusion. Shaking off the pain, he started walking, trying to make sense of what just happened. He searched for the heart, but it was nowhere to be found. Classic. The one thing he needed was missing. Zeke looked around, realizing that the mana he had absorbed was indeed from Bahamut. No wonder it felt so powerful. He turned his attention back to himself, noticing the symbol on his stomach again. He stared at it, wondering what it was and how it got there. As he touched the symbol, he wondered if it appeared when he sealed Bahamut's mana. Suddenly, the system notifications popped up, informing him that he had absorbed the heart of the cursed light dragon, Bahamut. Zeke read through the notifications, learning that the absorbed mana had changed his body to a divine body. But there was a catch: 95% of the power was compressed and sealed because he couldn't control it. Typical, even his own body was keeping secrets from him. Zeke scratched his head in confusion as a new notification popped up, announcing Terrakin Draker's secure library and something about a tutorial. What in the world was this nonsense? He decided to shelve the mystery for later, hoping the system would just get rid of it for now. But then he paused, pointing at one particular notification. Except this one, he thought. It seemed his ancestor was feeling a bit generous after all. A smirk played on his lips as he read the system's message, asking if he would like to open Terrakin Draker's other dying gift. Classic ancestor move, leaving parting gifts like it was Black Friday. The system confirmed his request, and with a dramatic flair, announced it was time to open Terrakin Draker's second dying gift. Zeke's eyes locked onto the chest. Curiosity piqued like it was a mystery box from his favorite streamer. As the chest creaked open, Zeke's jaw dropped. Whatever he was expecting, this wasn't it. His expression screamed pure, unfiltered shock, like he just found out his favorite series got an unexpected season 2. The scene shifted faster than a TikTok scroll, landing at a mansion that screamed luxury. Platinum Mansion, because apparently Terrakin Draker didn't believe in subtle names. Inside, a locker glinted with enough jewelry to make a dragon jealous. Zeke eyed the treasure, a smirk playing on his lips. This should definitely be enough. With a satisfied nod, he closed the locker, ready to see what other surprises his ancestor had left him. Time to take a look at the next big reveal. Zeke scanned the system's update, eyes widening at the flood of new info. Authority and Constitution? A lot of stuff got added, and it looked like this incantation could be unlocked once he leveled up. Classic ancestor move, leaving him a grind list like it was a gaming side quest. Zeke strolled along, scratching his head as he muttered about the vague descriptions in the system. Seriously, what even was a monim status? It sounded like a typo from a sleep-deprived intern. Taking a seat, Zeke realized this wasn't just another dying gift, but another status window tied to Terrakin. With a sigh, he commanded the system to open the window related to Terrakin, hoping for something actually useful this time. The system responded, stating that an information update was needed to access Terrakin Draker's secure library. Zeke raised an eyebrow. A secure library? What was Terrakin hiding in there? The system prompted Zeke to move to a location where an update was possible and offered to mark it on his minimap. Zeke groaned, realizing he had to go somewhere for this. When the location popped up, his eyes widened. Valhalla? Really? The image of Valhalla gleamed on the screen, looking as majestic and out of reach as ever. Zeke scratched his neck, feeling the weight of the task. Even he would have trouble entering Valhalla, and it wasn't exactly on his to-do list. But if it was related to Tarakan's gift, he might have to make an exception. Zeke pondered the situation, weighing his options. If there was something related to Tarakan's gift in Valhalla, it might be worth adjusting his plans. After all, how often did one get a lead on ancient, hidden powers? With a resigned sigh, Zeke accepted that he was stuck with this family for now. As he pressed forward, a notification popped up, announcing the activation of the beginner quest book. Great, just what he needed, more family drama with a side of quests. The system chimed in again, explaining that a tutorial for a low-level administrator would start soon, followed by a quest and a reward. Zeke mused that it sounded a lot like missions from an adventurer's guild. But what exactly was this tutorial going to entail? Hopefully not a pop quiz. As Zeke glanced back, light grids began forming around him. The system announced the start of the tutorial, and suddenly, the training area was bathed in a grid-like glow. Well, this was new. The grids expanded, covering the entire training area. Zeke found himself standing in a completely transformed space. It was like his surroundings had gotten a high-tech makeover. Zeke looked around, confused. Had he been teleported again? This place was definitely not where he had been a moment ago. It was like his surroundings had been swapped out during a commercial break. Suddenly, Zeke began to glow, as if he had just been sprinkled with magical glitter. This tutorial was already shaping up to be an interesting experience. Zeke's magical glow barely had time to fade before he realized he wasn't alone. Turning around, he found himself face to face with a group of orcs. Seriously, orcs? This tutorial was really pulling out all the stops. As if on cue, a quest notification popped up, announcing the sudden appearance of orcs and an appropriate quest. Zeke couldn't help but wonder if the tutorial was trying a bit too hard. The orcs didn't waste any time, swinging their clubs at Zeke. He barely dodged, thinking that the tutorial seemed to be creating situations where he could take advantage of the system. It would have been nice if he had known about this earlier. The orcs' destructive rampage left a trail of smoke in their wake. Zeke realized that this tutorial was going to be anything but boring. Zeke wasn't about to just stand there and watch the orcs tear up the place. He activated Swift Step and Continuous Slash, turning himself into a blur of motion. The orcs didn't even know what hit them. One second they were rampaging, the next they were sliced and diced like a sad dinner salad. Zeke stood amidst the chaos, the claymore feather in hand, feeling the newfound power of his constitution divine body. His combat skills and ether transfer rate had just gotten a serious upgrade. Was this what having a divine body felt like? So he was all for it. Looking down at his sword, Zeke couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence. With this power, taking down a purple knight should be a piece of cake. In a flash, Zeke teleported away, leaving behind the aftermath of his battle. He found himself back in the training area, as if he had never left. The whole ordeal had him questioning if it was all just an elaborate illusion. Sheathing his sword, Zeke couldn't shake off the lingering sensations. It all felt incredibly real, like he had truly been in the thick of battle. This tutorial was turning out to be way more intense than he had bargained for. A smile crept across Zeke's face as the system announced his reward. 40 points and access to the shop category. This was getting interesting. He wondered if he could buy items through the shop, his excitement barely contained. Zeke's eyes widened as he browsed the shop screen. The items listed were unbelievable giant's flesh, breath of a flame giant. This place was a goldmine, literally. But as he scrolled further, his excitement dimmed slightly. Everything was rare relics that cost a fortune. He pondered if he could make a fortune just by reselling these items. With a shrug, Zeke realized he could only sell ancient relics. Seeing an item worth 4 points, he wondered if he could sell it for 100 gold in the auction. Not bad for a day's work. Deciding to hold on to it for now, Zeke put the item away. He guessed he didn't really need the points at the moment. Stretching out, Zeke let out a sigh. Today had been a long day, filled with more excitement and adventure than he had bargained for. The scene shifted to the next morning at the academy. The Draker Academy Professor Research Center stood tall and imposing. Inside a room, a professor looked at Zeke with a mix of surprise and curiosity. He had managed to find a high-compression mana stone within a day, something unheard of. When questioned, Zeke simply replied that it was complicated for him to explain, leaving the professor even more intrigued. Zeke, eager to move things along, asked how long everything would take. The professor, holding the mana stone, casually mentioned it was already complete. Zeke was taken aback, impressed by the speed. The professor, however, was more intrigued by how Zeke had managed to bring such a rare item. Sipping his cup, Zeke couldn't help but feel the professor's suspicious gaze. Every time high-compression mana stones were found within the Kinet, they were registered using ancient texts. Zeke pondered, realizing these stones were used to manage ownership of some of the more expensive mana stones. The professor's scrutiny was almost palpable. However, Zeke was confident that the mana stone he had was not registered. After all, he was the first one to find it. The professor held the registration encyclopedia, deep in thought. Setting his cup down, Zeke appreciated the professor's ability to suspect rather than blindly believe. It was a testament to his judgment and skill. Zeke walked up to the professor and asked if they could leave now that the registration number was confirmed. The professor, still in awe, muttered something about not knowing. The scene shifted to a blacksmith shop where Galleon was ready to try activating something. A green magic circle appeared, hinting at the activation process beginning. The magic circle glowed brighter, and suddenly, the Galleon was covered in multiple magic circles, looking like it had just unlocked a new skill tree. The protagonist and the professor stood side by side, looking at their handiwork with the pride of parents watching their kid graduate. No cap, they totally nailed it. The professor checked his watch and announced he had a lecture to attend. Galleon, barely holding back his excitement, thanked the professor as he left. Galleon walked over to the protagonist, still in awe of the completed magic brazier. He thanked the protagonist, but the protagonist just brushed it off, saying it was all part of the deal. The protagonist rummaged through his bag, reminding Galleon of the condition he had offered. Galleon eagerly agreed, ready to fulfill his end of the bargain. The protagonist pulled out a dragon fang and asked Galleon to make it into a sword. Galleon was shook, realizing it was a fang from the cursed light dragon Bahamut. Like, what even was in that bag? Galleon was absolutely mind-blown. He had never seen anything like it before. He stammered, asking where on earth the protagonist had gotten such a thing. Zeke tried to play it cool, mentioning it was Terrakin Draker's second dying gift. He loved collecting things, from the heart to the fangs. But explaining it all was a bit complicated, and Zeke wasn't sure how to break it down. Galleon looked genuinely sad. His usual fiery spirit dimmed for a moment. Zeke looked at Galleon with concern, who then reminded him that he had made a magic bra and even gave him a chance to craft with a dragon's fang. Suddenly, Galleon was fired up again, declaring he would exceed every expectation. With a dramatic flair, Galleon declared himself as Galleon Hallopt and vowed to create Zeke's blade, even if it cost him his life. In a flashback, Zeke reminded Galleon that it was a request from the person who saved his life. Galleon, with his usual intensity, repeated his vow to create the blade, no matter what. Zeke, in the flashback, told Galleon not to be so dramatic, as it was a bit too much for him. He assured Galleon that he would sell the same. Zeke strolled out of the blacksmith shop, leaving Galleon to his dramatic antics. He mused about what kind of sword Galleon would craft this time, curious and slightly amused. Meanwhile, Galleon was already hard at work, hammering away with a determined look. Zeke couldn't help but feel a bit excited about the upcoming masterpiece, already looking forward to the result. Back in his room at Platinum Mansion, Zeke couldn't help but groan about the sheer amount of work it took to craft that sword. Like, who knew forging could be such a workout? After his intense duel with Duke, Zeke was still feeling the aftershocks of their clash. It had been a whole week since he received that mysterious note, telling him to come find Duke again. Talk about a cliffhanger. Zeke snapped back to reality, figuring something big was bound to happen sooner or later. No way that note was just a prank. A single step echoed in the room, and the tension suddenly skyrocketed. Duke walked in, looking as intense as ever, and immediately hit Zeke with a why. Why didn't he come find him like the note said? Drama alert. Zeke couldn't help but shiver. Duke's vibe was seriously giving him the chills. Duke's anger was palpable as he demanded the truth. Zeke couldn't shake the feeling that Duke really wanted to end him. Yikes. Zeke tried to play it cool, shrugging it off like it was no big deal. He couldn't believe Duke's accusation, arguing that if he really wanted a rematch, he would have come to find Duke himself. But then he stumbled over his words, making it clear there was more to the story. Duke wasn't having any of it. He instantly grabbed Zeke, demanding the truth once again. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. In a sudden burst of anger, Duke hurled Zeke straight out the window. Talk about a dramatic exit. Zeke was left stunned, the wind rushing past him as he plummeted. Not exactly the kind of airflow he was hoping for. As Zeke fell, he caught a glimpse of just how high up he was. His heart raced as he realized that at this height, he'd be a pancake before he could even think about healing. Luckily, he managed to catch the ledge, barely saving himself from an untimely end. Just as Zeke thought he caught a break, his relief was short-lived. Before he could even dust himself off, a firm grip clamped around his neck, lifting him off the ground like a rag doll. The Duke held him there, his voice dripping with a mix of amusement and irritation. He couldn't believe Zeke wasn't even trying to challenge him, almost like he was just there to mess with him. And honestly, the vibes were immaculate. The Duke wasn't having it, though Zeke had ignored his messages twice now, and that was not the move. Zeke realized with a sinking feeling that the Duke had just been toying with him this whole time. The Duke's fury was palpable as he gave Zeke an ultimatum: 5 seconds to spill the truth, or else. Zeke, sweating bullets, tried to play it cool. He cracked a joke, but the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He pointed out that the Duke hadn't even shown his true face yet. The Duke just stood there, seething, as Zeke called him out. With a smirk, Zeke dropped the mice, or at least he tried to. He threw out a name, calling the Duke by his supposed alias, Garden Keeper Dexter. The room was quiet, but then the Duke smiled, and not in a good way. In one swift motion, the Duke tossed Zeke across the room like he was nothing. Zeke tumbled, crashing into the far wall with a less than graceful thud. Yikes! Zeke rubbed his head, wincing from the pain. The Duke, standing over him, acknowledged that Zeke had a point. He revealed that he was once a Black Knight of Draker. Zeke looked up, questioning the Duke's past with a raised eyebrow. The Duke extended a hand and introduced himself as Duke Draker. Zeke bowed respectfully, apologizing sincerely for his earlier disrespect to a member of the family and to an honorable Black Knight. The Duke pointed at Zeke, questioning his intentions. Zeke, looking confused, admitted he wasn't planning anything. As the Duke started walking away, Zeke called out, curious about the Duke's past as a Black Knight. The Duke dismissed it as unimportant, stating he was once a Black Knight but no longer. Zeke was taken aback, wondering how that was possible. Zeke mused aloud, aware that one could rise in ranks but never knew anyone could drop from them. The Duke sat down, addressing Zeke as Kid. The Duke settled in, clearly ready to dive back into their intense conversation. He urged Zeke to keep going, his tone firm yet inviting. Zeke noticed the Duke's hand trembling slightly, a flicker of vulnerability beneath the man's stern exterior. He nodded in understanding, sensing there was more beneath the surface. Since the Duke had been honest with him, Zeke decided it was time to return the favor. He took a deep breath, preparing to lay his own truth on the line. The Duke leaned back, revealing he already knew Zeke's true identity. He questioned whether Zeke had gone through the trouble of becoming his apprentice just to get closer to him. Zeke confirmed it without hesitation. A slow smile spread across the Duke's face as he admitted he couldn't believe Zeke's boldness. The kid had guts, and that was something he could respect. With a sudden slap to his leg, the Duke let out an enthusiastic exclamation. The energy in the room shifted, the tension easing into something almost exciting. The Duke's grin widened as he declared he would accept Zeke as his apprentice. The words hung in the air, almost too good to be true. Zeke stood there stunned, barely able to process how quickly things had turned around. He better accept before the Duke changed his mind. Dropping to one knee, Zeke formally declared his intention to become the Duke's apprentice. He vowed to gain wisdom and power under his guidance, determined to bring honor to his master's name. The Duke couldn't hide his surprise, clearly not expecting Zeke to know the old-school apprentice vow. Zeke, ever the culture king, played it cool, saying it was just what knights do. The Duke smirked, calling him a sly snake, but Zeke just took it as a compliment, smooth as ever. As they walked through the fields, Zeke couldn't help but ask the question burning in his mind. The Duke, a little embarrassed by the whole master thing, told him to just spit it out already. Zeke asked what made the Duke accept him as an apprentice. Zeke recalled how only Andre, the so-called genius of the century, had become the Duke's apprentice after years of begging. He wondered what made him so special. Then it hit him. During their duel, the Duke must have seen something in him, something that could surpass even Andre. The realization made him stand a little taller. The Duke smirked and told Zeke to take a guess at why he chose him as his apprentice. Zeke, ever the confident one, thought it was because he was a genius of the family. The Duke just shook his head, amused by Zeke's confidence. The Duke burst out laughing, saying if that was the case, He would have chosen the girl from the Turin family instead. He liked Zeke's tenacity, though. It was what set him apart. The Duke explained that talent alone wasn't enough to reach the level of a red or black knight. It was about more than just skill, it was about heart, determination, and maybe a little bit of stubbornness. The Duke wasn't done yet. He pointed out that those who never faced real struggles often crumbled when things got tough. Like a delicate flower getting stepped on. They just couldn't handle the pressure. Zeke nodded along, already seeing the truth in the Duke's words. His mind flashed to images of knights, exhausted and on the ground, unable to push through their limits. The Duke stood up abruptly, signaling that the chit-chat was over. It was time for Zeke's first real lesson as his apprentice. Zeke followed, surprised to find himself in a gym hidden beneath the western greenhouse. Who knew plants and punches went together? As he walked, Zeke couldn't help but wonder what the Duke was planning. Had been running for what felt like forever. He glanced at the Duke, who just stood there watching. 3 hours of running, and for what? Finally, the Duke called out for him to stop. Zeke nearly collapsed in relief. But before he could catch his breath, the Duke had another question for him. With a wave of his hand, Zeke Draker asked what else the Duke wanted to know, trying to keep his cool. The Duke burst behind him, claiming it was nothing much, but his actions spoke louder than words. Suddenly, the Duke tried to grab Zeke's hand, catching him off guard. Quick as a flash, Zeke smacked the Duke's hand away, clearly not in the mood for any funny business. Zeke jumped back, putting some distance between them, his guard up. The Duke just looked at his hand, probably wondering what just happened. Then, with a flick of his wrist, the Duke asked if Zeke had a problem with him checking his pulse. Smooth move, Duke, real smooth. Zeke gave him a look, clearly not buying whatever the Duke was selling. Flashback hit, and the Duke recalled how something was off with Zeke from the start. Like no aura whatsoever, even after running around the gym for 500 laps. That's some next-level endurance right there. The Duke was not done yet. He was still shocked at the fact that Zeke had even stopped him from checking his pulse. He couldn't wrap his head around it. He had to ask, even if it made him sound like a concerned dad, was Zeke really unable to use aura? The Duke wasn't done yet. Standing at a distance, he muttered to himself about the bronze statue he was sure he had seen. He approached Zeke, recalling the uproar over that never-before-seen golden light. With a smirk, he pressed further, questioning why Zeke wasn't letting him examine his pulse if he was so sure about what he had seen. Zeke thought to himself, acknowledging that the Duke's curiosity was piqued, not out of suspicion, but genuine interest. He considered himself lucky to be dealing with the Duke, knowing he just needed to get his hands on Graham to avoid further suspicion about his aura. Until then, he had to be cautious. With a swift motion, Zeke pulled off his glove, acknowledging the Duke's point. He activated his mana reflection, a proof of his pure-blooded nature, but internally, he was confused about his inability to use aura. The Duke looked on, his expression shifting to confusion as he tried to make sense of the situation. Zeke looked down, apologizing for his earlier behavior and contemplating the consequences if it were found out that a Draker could not use aura. Zeke suddenly burst into tears, dramatically declaring that he would be chased out and was terrified of what might happen. The Duke reached out a hand towards Zeke, a gesture of comfort or perhaps curiosity. Zeke looked up at the Duke, his eyes still watery, and asked how it was, seeking some form of validation or reassurance. The Duke observed Zeke, noting the malice in his eyes that seemed too mature for his age. Yet, he couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't sense any aura from Zeke despite his supposed successful awakening. Zeke thought to himself, confident that the Duke couldn't be certain even after examining his pulse. That was the absolute power of the blessing right for a Draker. The Duke tapped Zeke's shoulder, suggesting that the reason for this anomaly was because Zeke was an irregular. An irregular, of course that's what the Duke would think. Zeke pondered, realizing that without knowing about classes, it was the only logical conclusion. Zeke asked what an irregular was, and the Duke explained that it was a term used for people with anomalous abilities. The Duke continued, giving examples like using aura and mana together or having an irrational ability like seeing into the future. He warned Zeke that irregulars weren't treated well, so it was best to keep this information to himself. Zeke rushed to the Duke, asking why he thought Zeke was an irregular. The Duke explained that Zeke's insane stamina and recovery were the reasons. Normally, even light damage took time to heal internally, but Zeke recovered almost instantly, which must have taken an insane amount of energy. The Duke asked Zeke what he thought that energy was. Zeke guessed it was aura, but since it was constantly being used for stamina and regeneration, there was barely any left to sense. Zeke worried he would never be able to use aura and wouldn't meet the Duke's expectations. The Duke laughed and told him not to worry about that. The Duke revealed that his Gale Arts was a special art that didn't use aura, leaving Zeke curious and hopeful. The Duke explained that a special art is a unique technique developed by a knight who has reached great heights. Normally, it involves the use of aura, but his Gale Arts was different. It relied solely on a trained body, no aura needed. Zeke was all ears, hoping this could be his ticket to powering up without the usual aura struggles. The Duke wasn't just all talk. He moved his foot slightly, promising a demonstration that would leave Zeke in awe. With a swift motion, the Duke's foot came down, creating a hole in the ground.
No aura, juste pure technique.
Zeke watched, his curiosity piqued. Zeke's eyes were glued to the scene, trying to catch every detail. The Duke was a blur, moving so fast that only his footprints were visible. It was like watching a ghost dance. Zeke was amazed. This was next-level stuff. No aura, no problem. The Duke was rewriting the rules right in front of him. The Duke stopped and asked if Zeke saw that. Zeke could only manage to ask if footsteps were really enough. The Duke chuckled, ready to show him more. Zeke got up, eager to see more. The Duke asked if he was ready for another round. Zeke nodded, confirming it was enough. The Duke praised Zeke's spirit, saying it was at least that of a black rank. Zeke, feeling the hype, told him to give it a go. Zeke readied himself, his body tingling with anticipation. This was his chance to learn something new, something that could change everything. With a deep breath, Zeke took that first step, his body buzzing with anticipation. He began to move, mimicking the Duke's posture and gait, trying to embody the same presence. Each step he took was deliberate, filled with purpose, just like the Duke's. He was determined to get this right. Suddenly, Zeke stopped, feeling like he nailed it. He waited for the Duke's reaction, hoping for approval. The Duke observed Zeke, recalling that he had indeed given him a gift just a week ago. He couldn't help but be impressed. A wide smile spread across the Duke's face. In his eyes, Zeke was perfect, like absolutely slaying it, no cap. Zeke smirked, wondering if his newfound confidence was enough to match the swagger of a top-tier black rank. The Duke playfully grabbed Zeke, teasing him about his earlier emotional moment. Zeke, trying to save face, shot back that a real black knight wouldn't go blabbing about it. The Duke just laughed, calling him out as his own disciple. The scene shifted to the Academy's dining hall, where the aroma of delicious food filled the air. The spread looked amazing, making anyone's stomach growl on sight. Zeke dug in, realizing it had already been a month since the Duke started training him. His appetite had grown as much as his skills, it seemed. As he ate, his gaze lifted, noticing someone approaching. Andre stood nearby, asking if Zeke could spare some time. Zeke shrugged, saying he was busy but could chat right there. Andre, slightly taken aback, agreed. Andre sat down, curious about how Zeke had managed to win over Sir Dexter. Zeke thought for a moment, figuring it was probably because Sir Dexter wasn't the Duke's disciple yet. The news of his own acceptance had probably made him a little anxious. Zeke shrugged, thinking he hadn't really done anything special. Sir Dexter had just picked him out on his own. Andre, looking mad, wasn't buying it. Andre scoffed, asking if Zeke was a pureblood. The tension was rising, and Zeke wasn't backing down. Zeke pointed out Andre's inferiority complex, and Andre's hands trembled with rage. Andre challenged Zeke, asking if that was all he had to say. Zeke grinned, replying he wasn't even halfway through. Zeke wiped his mouth, continuing that of course, even if the reason Sir Dexter took interest in him to begin with. Did Andre really believe Sir Dexter was a man who would pick a disciple for such a simplistic reason? Gripping a napkin hard, Zeke stated that the fact he was able to use that intrigue as a foundation to become his disciple was a testament to his own abilities. Zeke crumpled the napkin and threw it down, suggesting Andre stop wasting his time patting his ego with that inferiority complex of his. Looking down at Andre, Zeke finished by saying how about putting in some effort to be chosen himself. The scene shifted to the Western Greenhouse Arena, a place buzzing with anticipation and mystery. Suddenly, a figure was seen darting across the area, their swift movements drawing attention. Zeke and Duke exchanged glances, both bewildered by the unexpected sight. Zeke wondered aloud what was going on, but Duke was just as clueless, admitting he had no idea either. As Andre continued running, Duke explained that Andre had come to him, begging to stay by his side even if it meant being a servant. Talk about dedication or maybe just desperation. Duke had set a condition for Andre run 300 laps without using aura. And that's exactly what Andre was doing, pushing himself to the limit. Duke scratched his neck, chuckling at Andre's tenacity. This guy was really going all out. No aura, just pure grit. Andre was visibly tired, his body straining with each step, but he kept going. This was some next-level determination right here. Meanwhile, chaos was unfolding elsewhere. A summon for all students went out, and suddenly everyone was freaking out. Cue the panicked voices asking what was going on, with someone yelling about the patriarch's visit like it was the biggest news of the century. The sound of horses stepping filled the air, adding to the dramatic tension. The carriage rolled into view, looking all fancy and important. A commander walked alongside, looking all serious and official. He mentioned something about the patriarch, and you could tell this was a big deal. Howard stepped up, telling everyone to get ready. The response was immediate and respectful, with a chorus of "Yes, sir," echoing around. The carriage came to a stop, and the anticipation was palpable. Someone stepped out, and all eyes were on them. Howard bowed deeply, greeting the master of the Drakers with all the respect in the world. The vibe was intense, and you could tell this was a moment of great significance. As the master of the Drakers made his way through the room, everyone bowed in unison, their voices echoing in a powerful greeting. The energy in the room was electric, like a K-pop concert, but with more dragons and less glitter. The master then approached Howard, placing a hand on his shoulder, and praised his hard work. Howard, being the humble guy he is, brushed it off, saying his efforts were nothing compared to the master's. Cue the collective "ah" from the audience. The master then dropped a bomb, saying Howard was the only one who truly understood him. And just like that, Arthur Draker, the patriarch of the third transcendent household Dragonslayer Drakers, was introduced. No pressure, Howard. Howard, still bowing like a pro, suggested they move inside, noting the sunlight was rather hot. Because nothing says intense moment like a casual comment about the weather. Just as Howard finished his weather report, Arthur turned, and suddenly the crowd lost their chill. Cue the dramatic gasps and frantic whispers. Turns out, the patriarch himself had just walked in, and nobody saw that plot twist coming. Arthur, ever the cool cucumber, raised his hand, signaling for silence like a teacher trying to calm a classroom full of hyperactive kids. With the crowd finally settling down, Arthur dropped some wisdom on the young Dragonslayers, calling them the hope and future of the Drakers. No pressure, right? The crowd was all smiles as Arthur continued his pep talk, telling them to train hard and train more. Because, nothing says bright future like a whole lot of sweat and probably some tears. Arthur flashed a smile, reminding everyone that their development was basically the Drakers' development. Group project vibes. Anyone? The people were hyped, cheering like they just won the lottery. Yes, sir. Master of the Drakers indeed. Arthur had officially dropped the mic, and the crowd was eating it up. Arthur strolled away, all cool and collected, dropping a casual "let's go now." Howard, ever the eager assistant, replied with a quick "of course, sir." No time to waste, they had places to be. Cut to the door, where Zeke Draker stood tall, ready to make an entrance. He wasn't just any knight, he was the big boss, the guardian of the Dragonslayer legacy. Time to greet the leader of all knights. Zeke bowed, respect dripping from every pore. With all respect, he was here to show some serious admiration. Arthur turned, chuckling at the old-school greeting. No one did that anymore, but he wasn't mad about it. He told Zeke to take a seat, relax. Arthur had heard Zeke was a tea lover, so he'd pulled out all the stops. Rare stuff, the good tea, and some sweet pastries to boot. Zeke was thankful but also low-key freaked. How did Arthur know his favorite snacks? Zeke couldn't help but wonder, was there anything this guy didn't know? Even his snack preferences were on Arthur's radar. Zeke stared into his cup, feeling the weight of his family's rep. There was a saying, that there might be things the Emperor didn't know, but there was nothing a Draker didn't. And right now, that saying felt all too real. Arthur got down to business. He'd called Zeke here because word on the street was that Duke had taken in a disciple. Zeke nervously held his cup, confirming the rumor. Yeah, Duke had done him a solid, no doubt about it. Arthur leaned in, confirming that Duke had indeed taken Zeke under his wing. He knew what Zeke was after, no secrets there. But Arthur wasn't about to let him slide. If Zeke kept up with the teachings, he'd be gunning for the top spot, strongest on the continent, no less. Arthur's glare could have frozen lava. Zeke wasn't backing down, though. He wanted to be stronger than everyone so he could live life on his own terms. Classic big dream energy. A smirk crept across Zeke's face as he laid it all out. That was the goal, plain and simple. Arthur's whole vibe shifted. The air got heavier, like when your Wi-Fi cuts out right before the final episode of your favorite show. Then Arthur dropped the bomb. If Zeke was aiming to surpass everyone, that meant he was coming for Arthur too. The aura rolling off him was basically a neon sign saying, "Try me." Zeke's confidence wavered just a smidge. Arthur's presence was no joke, and suddenly, the reality of his goal hit him like a truck. Zeke started sweating buckets. His eyes widened as he muttered to himself, trying to process what he was seeing. Then it hit him. That sword, it was the legendary astral sword, the one that granted its wielder power over all living beings within a certain radius. No wonder Arthur was so chill. Zeke wiped the sweat off his brow and managed a nervous smile. This was either going to be the best day of his life or the absolute worst. With a deep breath, Zeke turned to Arthur, his voice steady despite the internal chaos. Of course, he thought this was the moment he had been preparing for. Arthur, ever the picture of calm, sipped his tea like they were just chatting about the weather. No big deal, just a casual tea party with a legendary sword in the mix. Arthur calmed his aura, his expression shifting to something more intrigued. He admitted that Zeke's statement was the most interesting thing he had heard in ages. Reaching into his pocket, Arthur pulled out something that glinted in the light. He explained that he had come to support both the Academy and Zeke, but he wasn't sure if that would be enough. Zeke couldn't help but think that Duke was impossibly strong. But Arthur was on a whole other level as he placed a card on the table. Arthur mentioned that this was a gift for having become Duke's disciple. As Arthur revealed the black card, Zeke was stunned. A Darun card? He couldn't believe his eyes. Arthur noted that Zeke seemed to know what it was. A credit card only given to a very select few. Zeke admitted he didn't think he'd get to see one in person. Just having it gave incredible benefits, and it didn't even have a limit. Arthur said he would have it under both their names so Zeke could use it freely. Zeke bowed and thanked him, promising to use it only when necessary. Looking at the card, Zeke thought that Arthur was making it seem like he was being nice, but his intentions were too obvious. Using a credit card leaves a record. He just wanted to keep track of what Zeke was doing. But if this was Arthur's method instead of opting for the Black Martial Squad, that meant he didn't see Zeke as a threat yet. Arthur mentioned he wouldn't waste any more of Zeke's time, as he was sure Zeke was busy with training to become the strongest on the continent. Zeke bowed as Arthur excused him, addressing Arthur as the master of the Drakers. As Zeke left, Arthur closed the door behind him, the quiet click echoing in the room. Arthur took a moment, walking away from the door, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. With a heavy sigh, Arthur tried to gather his thoughts, but the day was far from over. Suddenly, Duke appeared behind Arthur, his expression twisted in disgust as he accused Arthur of being sickening. Arthur, taken aback, asked why Duke was so angry. Duke wasn't having it, calling Arthur out for suddenly playing father to Zeke after neglecting him for so long. Arthur defended himself, saying he had no choice as the head of the household. Arthur, trying to keep his cool, pointed out that Duke's words were basically character assassination. The tension was real. Duke, not backing down, plopped himself down and challenged Arthur to take him away. Drama level 100. Arthur, ignoring the theatrics, pulled something out and admitted that Duke was the only one he could talk to without worries. Feelings. In an attempt to lighten the mood, Arthur offered a drink to go with their conversation. And not just any drink, Dragon Breath, the red one. Duke's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. Priorities, right? Arthur handed Duke the glass cup and casually mentioned how the atmosphere in the continent had been rather strange lately. Duke, who had been cooped up in the academy, wondered how Arthur knew that. Arthur just smirked, saying Duke had eyes and ears all over the place. Duke accused Arthur of already knowing his answer, calling him a snake. Arthur explained that the Emperor had gone crazy over the idea of immortality and was searching the entire continent for it. Duke agreed, and Arthur asked if he thought immortality was possible. Duke scoffed, saying magic could make someone look young, but immortality was a whole other story. Arthur, about to take a sip of his drink, agreed but added a however, hinting there was more to the story. Arthur dropped a bombshell, suggesting that the relic the Emperor was looking for might be something related to the Elder Dragon. Duke's eyes widened in shock at the revelation.